The Plymouth Township Planning Commission meeting will come to order at 7 p.m. And if the secretary will please call roll.
Kendra Barberina is here. Dennis Sobolski.
Here.
Jim Harb.
Here.
John Itzel.
Here.
Bob Dorshevitz.
Here.
Keith Postel.
Here.
Bill Pratt.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And the approval of this evening's agenda, application 2317-1218, Keynes Court. We will be discussing that. The reports will be read, but and we'll have the public hearing. But the applicant, because of some health issues, isn't here today, so we'll just be tabling that item for probably next month. So for anyone that is here to discuss that particular application, just be aware you'll have an opportunity to speak, but we won't be taking any action. So with that modification, is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve as amended.
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Pratt and supported by Commissioner Barberina to approve the amended agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And the approval of our minutes of the last regular meeting of December 12th.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve as submitted.
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Pratt and supported by Commissioner Barberina to approve the December 12th, 2018 minutes as submitted. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And then this is the time where we have public comment for anything that is not on the agenda. So if anyone is here, not wanting to speak to an agenda item, come up to the podium, give us your name, and if you would sign your name on the sign-in sheet, it makes it easier for the recording secretary.
Sure, I'll do that after.
Okay.
My name is Ron Rotoli. Believe it or not, I've lived in Plymouth Township since 1977, around the age of 5 when Mr. Pratt was actually my soccer coach. I hope he won't make me run extra laps for what I'm about to say. Please allow me 3 minutes.
Okay.
I wanted to raise concern about how general text amendments to the zoning ordinances are being received and handled by McKenna. After reviewing Plymouth Township Ordinance 99 regarding text amendments and Michigan Zoning Enabling Act of 2006, in addition to other PCs I'm still reviewing, I feel PC 2316-1218 reference to tax ID R780449901-706. I feel the text amendment to cluster housing was not handled properly, nor was the public hearing advertised and noticed according to the requirements in the acts I just listed for the 12/12/18 Planning Commission meeting. It's clear both property-specific and general text amendments were commingled. After reviewing the package, no reasonable person could believe the text amendment was brought about for the sole helpful intention of improving the zoning ordinance. Logically, any text amendment could benefit all. As you smartly questioned Ms. Haw, which of these items were developer-specific and which were best practice? After non-answers, you pressed her, and she finally states around 13 minutes, this is applicant initiative by a great developer partnering us over the last year and a half. Yet the application and the package clearly shows the circled property number stated on the cover sheet, and the materials describe their intent. It's no longer a general text amendment. I'm no lawyer. I'm hoping there were no bad intentions, and I'm looking forward to discussions on a suitable development, but there are rules that need to be adhered to, especially when the amendment is property specific. Specifically, Township Ordinance 9933.1, Text and Map Amendments, number 3, Amendment Review Procedure. Also in the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, specifically Section 125, 3103, 3401, 3202. The amendment was presented and supported by McKenna as a general text amendment, yet later said it was applicant initiative. It can't be general anymore. Basically, property-specific text amendments are to be handled in the same manner as the original zoning ordinance. We needed to list the parcel number in the news ad, and we didn't. We needed to give notice to the structures in within 300 feet, and we didn't. The applicant needed to be the title holder of the property. I'm not sure it was. I believe tonight's meeting needed to occur before subsequent text amendments. Outside of that, not required, but the meeting package was never posted until I inquired this Monday, nearly a month later. Not a best practice. Thank you for your time. Thank you all, including Ms. Haw, for the great projects you have and are working on, where the developer is fitting the project into the ordinances versus fitting the ordinance into the project. I don't know if you agree. I don't know if you can or care to comment or have a power to pass the motion to sort this out before it goes to the trustees. Or you can just go tell me to run some laps to blow off the stress this has caused me in fear of a lawsuit for the township I've lived in for 42 years. I can see the chess pieces lining up. Discriminating against seniors, we'll get into it all later tonight. And bonus for density. Something just isn't right here. I'll sign it now.
Okay. And before you leave, though, can you give a copy of that statement to Ms. Hall? Because you quoted a lot of, quotes from the ordinance.
Will do.
Do you have any response at this time, or? My suggestion is that perhaps we pass on his remarks to the township attorney to review it.
That would be fine.
Okay. So that's what we'll do. Hand it over to Ms. Howell, and is anyone on the commission to object to have the township attorney to look at that and give us his opinion?
Could we just summarize the objections? You said there was not proper notice?
No proper notice was given to property holders within 300 foot. This application has a partial ID number on it. It's not a general text amendment. It's property specific. There's rules that have to happen that's followed. Advertising in newspaper must include the parcel number. Notice must have been given. Look how many people are here tonight. They would have been here for that. There's no doubt in my mind.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming out, and
I'm sorry?
thanks for coming out and doing that research, and, we'll follow up on it
Sure,
and
there
see
was
what
no
develops.
intent. I mean, none of us are lawyers that I know of. It's complicated stuff. I had to read it for a week, so.
Okay. Well, thanks. Anyone else that wishes to speak on a non-agenda item? Okay, thank you. So moving on to public hearing, application 2319, 1218, the Regency at Ridge Meadows. And Ms. Howe will read her report, and she will also summarize what the role, because there's so many people here, and we want you to understand what's before us, and also what our role is, and also the Board of Trustees, the whole process that this application needs to take. So Ms. Howe will summarize that as well as reading her report. So Ms. Howe, your report.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you. The application before you is a request for a cluster housing option. And before we get into the specifics of the application before you, wanted to go briefly over the background for a cluster housing development. So up on the screen, you'll see on the left is a traditional subdivision, traditional platted subdivision. And then on the right is an example of a cluster housing development. These are also known as open space communities, open space PUDs, and they have been a longstanding flexible development tool that municipalities have used not only in Michigan but across the nation for some time. And the benefit of the cluster housing development is that, so in this case, you can see that the lots are smaller, but in exchange, there are a wealth of open space and public access. In this case, it is to the waterfront that would otherwise be held in private hands. So with this development scenario here, there are a number of open space areas that would be available for the enjoyment of the community in exchange for smaller lots and perhaps a density equated to that. This is something that has been successful in many communities, but it's important to note that it's not appropriate in every situation, which is why the township and other municipalities have zoning ordinance provisions that allows the Planning Commission and the governing board, the Board of Trustees, to evaluate the merits of such a proposal. In terms of a cluster housing review process, the 5 steps on the screen delineate the planning public portion of the process. So right now, this is where we are tonight, a public hearing held by the Planning Commission for consideration of the option, the concept. And then that recommendation would go on to the Board of Trustees at another public meeting just to consider the option, the concept of the project. If approval were to be granted for the option at that point, right here, then we would continue on through the process, which would involve subsequent public meetings with this body, the Planning Commission, and then ultimately a final body by the Board of Trustees that would approve the site development plan and also the cluster housing contract and the master deed and the bylaws. So there are a number of opportunities for public comment, for feedback loops, and within this entire process, we're also seeing reviews by the engineer, the fire department, the police department, Wayne County for stormwater and access management to the site. So there's many layers that are built into this process, and it's not a short process. Where we are tonight is this public hearing meeting, and I'd like to make it very clear that the applicant has requested to hold the public hearing this evening and to open the floor for discussion as required by state statute and our township ordinances, but to take that feedback and the feedback of the Planning Commission and incorporate it into their design and then bring back a concept for later consideration at a future meeting. So the applicant tonight is not requesting a motion of consideration. They're requesting to table and to hear the public's comments. That's not required by the ordinance. They are certainly within their right to request action this evening, but I believe are doing so in good faith to have this dialogue and, from what I understand, to also hold other meetings with HOAs in the vicinity. Just briefly on their proposal, Regency at Ridge Meadows is the southwest corner of North Territorial and Ridge Road. There are a total of 78 units, single-family detached homes that are included in this proposal, with a target demographic of empty nesters to allow for aging in place, with one access drive onto Ridge Road, a boulevard at the southern entrance. This subject parcel in particular is eligible for a cluster housing option in that it is less than 40 acres. It is zoned the R1E single family residential district, and there are existing natural features on site that could be considered worth preserving under the existing ordinance. So under our current Article 22 cluster housing option, the applicant is eligible to request this development method. The role of the Planning Commission this evening, since the applicant is not requesting a motion of consideration, is to listen to the presentation that will be made by the development team and to provide constructive feedback based on the comments of the public and planning best practices and adherence to the ordinance and your experience with other single-family cluster housing projects in the township. And as we're at the concept stage of this planning process, we'll be looking for things like the amount of density, the overall site layout, the position of the road, the access to the site, the areas of the open space, the quality of the open space. Those are the types of appropriate things to be discussing at this level of planning. We wouldn't be getting into specific house facades or the specifics of the landscaping plan at this point. Those would be related to the site plan aspect of the process, which is later down the road. So we're at the high level overall concept for this project: density, layout, the arrangement of the units in the open space, and the benefit to the township. The applicant has a presentation, I believe, that they would love to give this evening, and then the recommended motion is to table this application for up to 12 months, 1 year, to allow the development team to return to the Planning Commission at another public meeting to present a revised concept. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Richmond, your engineering report?
Thank you, Commissioners. We have reviewed the cluster housing option for the reference project prepared by Atwell dated August 23rd, 2017, 2017, and received in our office in December 2018. Based on the availability of the existing utilities around the site, it does appear that a residential development can be designed to meet engineering requirements of the township. The general layout of the paving and utilities must be designed to the satisfaction of the Planning Commission and the engineers prior to granting approval. If you have any questions, I'll be able to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. And the applicant has received communication from the fire department, and they found no deficiencies thus far in their plan from a public safety perspective. So just real brief, the process that we're going to go through here this evening is you've already heard the reports from our planner and from the engineer and the fire department. Now we're going to be turning the floor over to the applicant. They'll be making their presentation. And when they've concluded that, I'll open up the floor up to public comments. And then we'll close those public comments. And then I'll be presenting the questions that you have raised to the developer at that point. And after that has been completed, then the Planning Commission will ask any questions that they have that haven't been covered, and also comment, give direction to the applicant. So that's the route that we're going to follow this evening. So with that, the applicant is here, and give us your name. And yeah.
Good evening. My name is Brian Amon, and I am an attorney for. Sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the cluster, the one that we did.
Right.
Yeah, that's the one that.
So procedurally, how is,
Well, we're going to see. We'll have to ask the township attorney to see what he said happens. And
you wanna-
if we were in line, if we're out of line, then we're going to have to see what his recommendation is and what we do after that.
but you want to go forward tonight?
I think we need to go forward tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything has been published, the public, open meeting and everything else. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. My name is Brian Amon. I'm an attorney. You hear it okay? Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I have with me Eric Lord and John Eckerman from Atwell. They're going to, first and foremost, try to run the PowerPoint because that's beyond my pay grade. And I can't talk in PowerPoint at the same time. While they work on that, I'll just try to run through some of the narrative that pictures won't offer a lot of assistance on. The prospective developer of this project, Grand Sakwa, has a lot of experience throughout Michigan and in residential project has developed over 25,000 home lots in terms of their past history. Some of them are locally, some are Rolling Oaks was a project, as well as Chase Farms in Novi, Brookline Ridge in Northville, and West Ridge Estates in Canton, and several others. They've also done a lot of commercial, over 1 million square feet of commercial development. People are probably most familiar with locally the development they did, the shopping center at 6 in Haggerty, which has the Barnes & Noble and whatever. That's essentially a Grand Sakwa property that they did and have continued to manage. And so, here we go. And so that, just a little bit about them. They've been around for some time, have substantial investments, and are a very credible developer, have done a lot of stuff around many communities in Western Wayne, but across the state, and have developments throughout the country as well. I'm going to also now talk a little bit about the project itself, try to deal with some information, try to give an explanation. Then I'll try to give a little more specific about the comparison to the project, and then details on the project as well. So I'll try to be brief so that we can really hear. We're here to really hear from neighbors and other concerns tonight, so that we can, as Laura explained, then take those comments back, try to incorporate them into what we're seeing in terms of prospective design, and then go from there. The site is essentially, it's 23, we showed it at the thing, 23.66 acres, currently zoned RE, master planned residential. There's some large trees. We've obviously done a tree survey and know some things about it. But a mixture of hardwoods and softwoods, but there's also a large presence of invasive species on this site that are part of the composition as well. And then the concept, as we start talking about the concept of essentially a cluster we're really kind of driven by it a little bit like looking at the woodlands of Deer Creek, which is just across Ridge Road behind the subdivision, which is, although a smaller site, 7.1 acres, there's 20 units on it, has a density of 2.8 units per acre. Similarly along this kind of product, as you've heard, and you'll hear more from John in a second about we are seeking to build what we would describe as an active adult targeted community, not age restricted, but active adult targeted. And it's our belief that there is a significant demand in Plymouth Township for this kind of product. It is our desire not to go in and try to build the large homes that a lot of people already currently have. We're looking for product that people who are generally aged 50 to 55 up to about 70 who want to move into, who's generally a ranch-style, single-story product. The products we're proposing wouldn't be, we wouldn't allow any two or three-story units. It would strictly be limited to a story or a story and a half if they wanted to have a little portion up in a loft area or whatever. And that was intended, keeping at that level, essentially to try to keep it so that the massing of the product was not as substantial as some of the large homes you see, because we're trying to be respectful of existing sight lines for neighbors and existing products. But this active adult product is one that Plymouth Township, we believe, has a great demand for. And our desire and our hope is that this product is going to be such that the residents of Plymouth are going to want to move into it. There's a great desire to stay in the township, but yet they want to find something that they can age into and have greater safety and all the top finishes. These are high-end products. The base elevation, the base size of these homes will be basically 2,470 some square feet, so 2,500 square feet. The price point of these homes, the base, because of there are people who are essentially my age and some around us, they've lived in larger homes, they've done a lot of remodeling, they've done a lot of upgrading, and they generally want to move into an upgraded, newer home with higher finishes. So the price points of these tend to be closer to $250 a square foot of construction. So we anticipate the value of these units to be a $600,000 unit. And so that's the expectation in terms of the entirety of the planning and the moving forward in terms of the design and the finishes and the trim levels of these pieces. And so that's what we envision when we talk about active adult. We expect a fairly high-end appearing and high-end living circumstance for people who want to buy in there. And so it's just a little bit about the product. The woodlands of Deer Creek that we have up here is essentially a comparison as it relates to the kind of a layout that you get with the cluster housing. We want to come into a more creative layout. We realize, and the administration made it clear to us, if we were to look at doing something on this site, there's been tremendous uncertainty about this site for a number of years about whether the church would try to do something on the site and whether something would impact the neighbors around it. And there's a desire to try to make sure that the neighbors around the site have some protection from just being impacted by potential residents on the site. So the desire was, and we were told, try to find a design that wouldn't be allowed normally under the ordinance, because if you go with individual lots, literally you will allow someone to build a home up to potentially 35 feet from a rear lot line, and with things like garages and tennis courts, basketball courts, and those kinds of things. We are asked to look at, if we were going to look at this property, to come up with an overall design that loaded the units away from the west boundary and away from the south boundary to try to provide a maximum buffer for neighbors in there to try to maximize the setbacks on there. And in terms of the general layout of the product and the project, to create it in a way that that area is a general common element. It's an area that people who live in the units can't go out and start putting shovels in the ground or putting up playscapes or those kinds of things. It is controlled by the association. It will be maintained by the association, and it will be essentially maintained as a green space, and residents in the units will have only the ability to affect potentially the landscaping between a sidewalk and their unit as it relates to their sides, but they're going to have essentially planting areas along the sides. Other than that, they will have no ability to go out and unearth any portion of this green space or anything. So we wanted to try to make sure that there was built into the planning and the documentation of this quiet for that area, that buffer area, and to guarantee that that buffer area would never be disturbed going forward. So that was part of the concept of looking at it. And when we looked at the woodlands at Deer Creek, you can see how they kind of had a creative layout, and that the slide is off, but had a layout where try to swerve it around into the woods, and so we wanted to kind of follow that as well. The site history. There have been, the church has considered other potential developments. They've been, in fact, I used to work at Northridge, haven't worked there since July of a year ago, but I can tell you while there, they were approached by prospective developers for a charter school project, also for a senior living facility project. And the church certainly took those under consideration. And when we approached them as to the ability to try to buy this for a residential project, we were pleased to actually be able to get a deal put together with them that they would in fact allow us to buy the property. This project, if we were to go forward, Grand Sackville would be purchasing the property from the church. The church would have no further involvement in the project. They wouldn't have any ownership interest. The project would actually use the church's current stormwater retention pond that they have towards Ridge Road and expand and improve that pond to fix it. And this project would use that to try to create a more of a regional stormwater basin. It would take up more of the church property than it does now, limiting the ability of expansion of parking and those kinds of things at the church going forward if they ever tried to do that. So this property, as proposed, would be purchased by Grand Sackville, developed into market sale units, expecting them to be about $600,000 a unit, and really the church's involvement would essentially end at the closing of this property. So we have up here unencumbered. I have talked with residents around the property some have been told by the real estate person when they purchased the home that this property was part of the consent judgment that Northridge had. And I can tell you it is not. The church did not own this property when they went through the consent judgment property on the original construction of the main campus. Don't have to take my word for it. I'm sure the township attorney and others will verify that if anybody has a question on that. But they've also been told that if it's not part of the consent judgment, that it would never be built on, that there were restrictions and covenants and restrictions. And I can tell you as a matter of law and a matter of fact, that's not true. There are no deed restrictions on any of this property. This property sits there essentially eligible for development like any other parcel in any other community, subject to the respective ordinances and everything else that's out there. So when we say unencumbered, it's not part of the consent judgment, and there are no covenants and restrictions prohibiting any kind of construction or development on the site. And it's just essentially a regular real estate sale. Grand Sackville, under the contract with the church, is the purchaser, would essentially close on the property and then start the development process, and the church would no longer have any legal or any nature of any interest involved in the property. And I'm going to hand it to John in a second, but I've described a little bit about the active adult product. And we're essentially, this picture is a little bit misleading, but we provided it because this is how people are used to looking at projects. As if there's like a lot and a home and a building envelope. The fact is, this project, though, will not have lot lines. This project will essentially have building envelopes. That means the unit owner will own their building, and essentially within the walls of that, but they will not have a lot line between the building next door. We want to have as much control on the space around the units and the space going as possible, so that will be association property. It will mean that neighbors don't have to worry about a person in a unit trying to prop up some kind of structure or some kind of improvement or whatever. There will be total control of the area outside the unit under the master deed and under the bylaws. But we're showing essentially what would look like a lot line just to give people kind of a visual image of kind of how the layout would be. We think it probably shows a little better than that. Yeah, Deer Creek is the great example of that. That's the exact same thing as that as well. It's a unit condominium. Under this approach, this means the association will be the one which will have professional maintenance over all the general common area. As part of you'll hear later on details of the plan, as part of the overall landscape plan, there's going to be, the intent is to add a lot of evergreens and other trees in the buffer areas between the commons and this project. And so that has to be done in a way that it's not only planted, but maintained over time. That will be by the association, professionally done, not dependent on a neighbor who doesn't know how to grow a tree or kill a tree or mow a lawn or get rid of weeds or those kinds of things. And so we're looking for professional management on that. And the next line is the open space. We are essentially showing 27% open space. 27% of the site is shown as open space in this conceptual design as it is. But it also shows up here essentially the buffer area that we're showing from the setback of the building envelope to the property line. So up on the northwest corner, it would essentially, that the closest unit would be no closer than 118 feet to the west property line. And you'll see that yellow dashed line all the way around. That's just to kind of give a sense of the gradation of it. That's a 50-foot from the property line, just to roughly show you kind of what the spacing is. But so up the upper left-hand corner, the closest unit would be no closer than 118 feet to the rear property line. In the middle of that area, it would be no closer than 152 feet to the rear property line. And then down on the bottom, there would be no unit closer than 100 feet along the southern boundary of the property line. And if you, under normal development practices and through the township ordinance process, if we were to do the standard kind of single-family subdivision, you know, standalone homes here, you could essentially end up with a home 35 feet from a rear property line through the, normal setback would be 50, but there are procedures to get it to 35 feet. We are essentially making sure we're trying to nearly triple that in all instances as it relates to that. That's a key element of this design, to try to pull the units away from the existing homes to the west and to the south. And then that's just a kind of a sample of the landscape plan that we're going to be presenting. We've already surveyed all the trees, and we understand there's going to have to be planting of additional trees, evergreens and deciduous trees in there, to try to create the kind of screening. This is intended to be a very high-end, expensive-looking forested project, and that's part of the intent of the developer, because we're trying to attract people who are moving out of nice homes, large homes, and they're making a decision, a life decision. They may want to be in Florida a couple months out of the year, and they want someone else to take care of everything, so we've got to make sure the landscaping and the site meets their needs. Site impacts. I'm going to let John talk a little bit about site impacts. The county has talked about that as it relates to active adult and traffic and those kinds of things as well.
Thank you, Brian. Early on in the process, we did meet with Wayne County on this, and based on the conversations there, their desire was, you know, in order to minimize impacts, and when I say impacts, it's mainly left turn conflicts with driveways along this stretch of road. Their goal and desire is for us to line up the boulevards exactly across the street from each other. There are other options, but that's their primary goal. So when we came back to the drawing boards looking at this, what you see is our boulevard lined up directly across the street from the development on the other side, Fox Drive South. This will minimize all the left turn conflicts and ease the burden of traffic impacts on that stretch of road. One other thing I wanted to touch on is with active adult, if you look at the trends for, you know, based on national counts, this demographic uses the roads a lot less frequently than your standard nuclear family. We have 2/3 in here. You can look at case-by-case scenarios where this actually goes down to about 50%. So in a site like this, let's say a standard family has 500 trips per day for a standard development on this property. The active adult communities will utilize half of that, 275, 280 trips per day. And their peak times are different as well. When when you run a traffic study, you have your AM and PM peak times where it's rush hour. And a lot of the residents of this community really don't want to be on the roads during rush hour. I mean, if I didn't have to be on the roads during rush hour, I wouldn't either. So they're not driving to work. A lot of these, if they're working, they work from home, or they have the options of going in at alternate times. So they don't tax the roads during key peak flows as well. Housing details, Brian touched on some of this as well. I mean, we've thrown around the term active adult. Another term I like to use is empty nester. The demographic that this will be catered towards is, it's a family, their kids are away at college, they're sick of cleaning a 3,500 square foot home, it's 5 bathrooms, they're sick of picking weeds, but yet they don't want to give up any of the quality of what they'd like to do. So these homes will be high-end, as touched on, granite countertops, high-end appliances, crown molding, just, you know, these will be gorgeous, gorgeous homes. And from what all the communities that I've worked on that have this kind of product, typically 65 to 75% of the ultimate residents that move into these are residents from Plymouth Township, from Northville, from Canton, from, you know, local areas and larger developments where they want to, they love their local grocery store, they want to stick with their own church, they want to still go to their same barber or hairstylist, but yet they want to move down. So typically your elevations, and these are conceptual elevations at this point, but they will be something kind of similar to this. You're looking at a ranch style product, maybe 1.5 stories, and they might be an upstairs dorm, 2-3 bedrooms for when the kids come to visit at Christmas. They will have basements on them as well. High quality elevations for the community that they're targeting. This isn't age restricted, it's just simply empty nester.
Yeah, I've actually had a meeting already with the head of a few of the heads of neighboring associations, and we intend, and they've asked to try to have further meetings with them after tonight, after we've heard some initial comments from everybody, then we plan to do that again. But the question came up about, is there a place we can kind of look at to kind of see a similar project or layout or whatever? And I'll say to you what I've said to them. There is a project that's essentially on the east side of Sheldon Road, north of 5 Mile, called Northville Hollow. And it's a little more compressed and compact, narrower streets. For example, Deer Creek is similar. It has like 24-foot wide streets. We are planning to have regular, normal county width, 27-foot wide roadways. But the product, there's such a differentiation in the product in there as it relates to that, because the concern was this layout, it was going to look like it was going to be just all linear. You're going to have, it looks like, my gosh, it's going to look like army barracks and those kinds of things. And I certainly understand how these pictures could create that sense of concern as it relates to how everything would look linear and it looks just like one row house after another. The fact is, the design restrictions in the master deed and the bylaws will in fact require a diversity of design. You'll never be allowed to have the same house next to each other. We'll also have, we always use like a differential setback in the front of a 5-foot of a unit or whatever. The Planning Commission has already communicated that they want to make sure that you don't have garage door dominant designs. There has to be other features like fireplaces and things in the front and those kinds of things to create architectural interest. So, to where you could see something kind of like that, I would encourage, if you want to kind of take a look at Northville Hollow, even though the only distinction is there's not as much brick on that product as we intend to have on this product. But the design kind of layout and the appearance of it, it would be a similar thing, a feel to kind of just see how the units are all so different, although they're in close proximity to each other. So if that's something from a conceptual perspective as it relates to this design, I would encourage you to kind of look at. John also mentioned other communities have in fact engaged in active adult projects, and they actually have ordinance provisions around it, and their ordinances actually recognize that these projects actually impact less. And for example, they only for example, in those communities, they only charge a sewer tap fee of 60% because they scientifically have proven that active adult communities don't flush as much as regular normal family projects and those kinds of things. And so they look at the impact or whatever. So this active adult community tends to be a great asset to a community. People have a lot of disposable income, but they don't have the same kind of impact. They pay the same tax dollars to support the schools, but there are not kids coming out of here to go to schools. And so there are a lot of other great impacts as a result out of that. And I'm just going to finish up with a couple things, and then we'll certainly be glad to hear from everybody. We believe this project is one that will be filled generally by Plymouth Township residents. People at Plymouth Township, I think everybody in Western Wayne County knows, has the lowest tax rates of a community, of all the communities out here. Plymouth Township has a devoted residency that want to try to have home products in this area, but there's not a great supply of aging in place kind of ranch style product. And so it's our desire to try to meet that need, what we perceive in the community. It's also our desire not to build product that competes with the neighbors right around us. So when I was asked at the meeting the other day about why wouldn't you just build these large homes, someone else pointed out that the market seems to be slowing a little bit for larger homes right now. We're not interested in competing with existing homeowners of larger homes to create a product that they're going to compete with if they're trying to sell. We think this is a product the community is looking for. It's one that the community will support, and we expect it to be filled generally with Plymouth Township residents when we get done. It's our desire to continue to listen to what the residents have to say and people have to say on this hearing, and then we're also going to continue to meet with the associations after this to try to work on other issues of concern. One of the issues that was raised was essentially the location of the driveway. I sat with the woman, she's the head of the Commons, she's the president of the Commons Association. She is the very first house off of Ridge Road, and she's asked if we could explore shifting that driveway, either using the north cul-de-sac as a driveway or shifting it as close up to the chapel as possible. And we're going to explore that with Wayne County. As they've mentioned, they're trying to avoid left-hand turn issues, left-hand turn conflicts. But we certainly intend, after this conversation, to go explore that in greater detail with the county to find out what are the obstacles. Are they insurmountable or are they fixable? And let me also just reference the chapel. We've been asked about how come this chapel is not part of this project? The fact is, we are getting approximately an acre of property. The chapel sits on a 3-acre parcel, and the parcel wrapping around it is about a 23-acre parcel. We're getting essentially close to an acre off the side of that by splitting off the northern boundary of that property, so that that parcel will be reduced down to about 2 acres. That will be left with Northridge. But I'll tell you, I was working at Northridge when we acquired that, and the church's basis in that property, the cost and money that's expended, makes it essentially not economical to be part of this project. We've had the conversation with them, and certainly expressed to them the desire. People say they'd love to see that be included and kind of gone. It's just the basis of that was such that there's just no way, short of someone saying, okay, go ahead and construct a 4 or 5 story project on there to support, that would support the purchase of that project. So that property is not part of this project. And we don't foresee it becoming a part of this project because we don't think people want a 4 or 5 story building over there as part of a residential project. So anyway, with that, we're prepared to listen and answer any questions at the end of it, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the time.
Okay, well, you have a seat. We'll open up the public hearing. And we'll open up the public hearing at 7:44. And so everyone is entitled to come up to the podium. You're limited to 3 minutes. We ask you to be clear, concise, and cogent. Once everyone has had a chance to speak, those that want to speak, if someone that has spoken earlier has thought of something that hadn't been mentioned, then they can come up for that second time so we can hear whatever other comments they might have thought of as they were sitting down and hearing other questions come before us. So I ask you just to raise your hand and come up. There's a signature page on the podium, so we ask you to sign in. It'll make it easier for the recording secretary. So sir, you want to come on up? And just give us your name also, and don't forget to sign.
Once again, Ron Rotoli. I don't know if this can be back and forth question and answer. I don't know if that can happen in 3 minutes, or I just have to make statements.
You just make the statements. You ask a question. I'll keep
Here's
track of the question.
How dense can this currently be under the current standards? I'll answer it. 18 cluster irregular houses just like ours. How do you think this fits in with the developments around it? It's required to. It seems quite dense. According to the text amendment you tried to pass, 2316-1218, bonus, it seems like you gave yourself quite a bonus, 435% bonus to be correct. I thought you were going to get like 2 or 3. This is zoned for 18 right now. I moved here from Mayflower Sub because it was too dense. I got new kids driving, 15 and 17. I wanted to be in an area that was less dense. It was intentional. I am being very sincere. That's why we moved here. I admit you can develop here. 18 more lawnmowers I'll deal with. 78 more lawnmowers. I cannot believe the lawn mowing I listen to on a daily basis. 2 more questions. Are you currently the title holder of this property? It doesn't sound like it. And last question, has Grand Sakwa, within recent years, been involved in a density lawsuit with the township within 50 to 100 miles of this? It sounds like you've only worked there a year and a half. We can Google it. It's pretty searchable. I think that is it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, you're in the back.
My name's Wayne Schloop. I live at 12368 Holland Park Drive on the southern border of the property. My concerns are, number one, the density. If anybody's been out there on Saturday afternoon or Sunday now, the traffic is pretty congested, if you will, for Northridge. This is only going to exacerbate that big time. The other thing I'd like to mention, where they do have the proposed entrance and exit, you could not make a left-hand turn out of there on Saturday afternoon or Sunday. It would be a death wish. And the third thing I'd like to mention, we also have drainage issues on this portion of the property. And I don't know what's in the plan, but hopefully you would look at that. And finally, historically, before Northridge ever bought the property, there was a developer back in about 2000 that wanted to build single-family homes, but they were about 1/2 inch, or about 1/2 acre properties, and that came before the Planning Commission, I would say somewhere around 2000 or 2001, and there should be a record of it, and that was denied, again, because of the density and the traffic to the church. That's all I have.
Oh, okay, thank you. Anyone else wishes to come forward? Yes, you, yeah. Ma'am, yeah, you up here. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Jean Hannon, and I live at 12243 Howland Park Drive. I live on the back side of Plymouth Commons, and I back up to the neighborhood Landers Court, the one Landers and Landers Court. Now, when we moved in, that was a farm. That became a neighborhood. The line of houses that back up to us were required to be closer to our land amount, and then the ones across the street from them and further on got to be smaller. So there is a precedence where the Planning Commission had said things that back up to us have a bigger land amount with their houses, but everything else in the neighborhood can be a different size. I'd also like to talk about the open space. You state that there's 25 or 27% open space, and yet none of that is usable. According to what I'm seeing in your picture, everything is trees. It also, from what you did in the Deer Creek or Deer Woods, whatever the other one was, you said there were no sidewalks. So now you've got an aging adult population that you have nowhere to walk, no walking trails, nothing for those aging people to do but walk on the street where everybody's driving. And the streets, I'm not sure if they are or not going to be the regular width of Wayne County, but I have a concern about that. And if you're going to offer something to people, you want to offer them something that is a bonus for giving up the smaller lot size. I also ask that in watching the video from the meeting in December, the board here had a lot of questions. The commissioners all were asking about what does it mean to get bonus density. There was a lot of confusion. I'm really concerned that they're coming and asking you, should the township approve the change in the text to the zoning ordinance that is going to go in front of them based on your recommendation to go forward whenever that goes in front of the township board. It comes back and now you're still in the same point of asking the question, what does bonus density mean? How good is exceptional property to get bonus density that goes from what would be today 18 to 77 or 78, whatever that number is. And I'm concerned that 600,000 wouldn't do it. I think 1.2 million would be tough for me to explain and to agree that that's exceptional quality to go from the numbers of what would be now 18 and up to 78. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Cheryl Dove. I live at, I'm in the corner house as you come into Plymouth Commons, as he mentioned. And yes, we are concerned about that driveway about 5 feet from the back of our property line. Already, you know, we have cars turning in and out, flashing headlights across the back of our house, and now we're going to have even more from this. Also, as Wayne and Jean both mentioned, this BRM that was, I have the actual paper here, from September 1999 that was not approved. There was a mention in here that the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality regulated wetlands exist for 1.13 acres on this land that they're proposing to build structures on. And it is awfully wet back there because I walk my dog. It's wet behind our property with the water runoff. The ponds at the church are overflowing now. Ridge Road floods when there's big storms, rainstorms. And I guess my concern is the density. Just looking at the picture, this is misleading because it's got all of our backyards. It looks like our backyards are all part of the green space in this picture. I don't see a lot of green space in there, in this land. So.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Craig Gerber. I'm at 12488 Holland Park Drive. It's just along the back as well. My points might be smaller compared to the others, but I'm curious if within the real estate transactions, if permanent easements can be included with that between the church and the property, just to make sure. And then also, currently, I can already tell every time when summer comes because my water pressure cuts in half throughout there, so there's already a water flow delivery problem in our subdivision that I experience. I'm a little concerned about the additional draw. I know we mentioned here that the plumbing, flushing the toilets is much less in these, but it's a concern that I'd experienced. So just make sure that that's under consideration too, that we have enough water supply to actually fill that.
Your water pressure drops?
Yeah, just during the summer, during when irrigation occurs, because of course with all that area to be irrigated, then that's going to be another draw on the water supply. So like I said, I can tell every time the summer hits, sprinklers go on, my water pressure cuts in half.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes, you, sir. And just a reminder to sign in. Laura, is there a sign-in sheet at the door too?
No, just the podium.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Gaurav Sharma. I live on 12415 Holland Park Drive. I'm not a town planner. I'm not a developer. I'm just a doctor. But what I see is majority of traffic fatalities in our state take place on a left turn. And the way I'm hearing is that we already have a lot of congestion on Saturday and Sundays. And my question to everyone in the room is this something that would make it difficult? Having said that, I am father of 2 young kids, and they will become teenagers at some time, and I hope to live in this area. Teenagers are at a higher risk of traffic accidents. So are we congesting an already congested area more and more? That is a question that I want to pose this group. Thank you.
All right, thank you for coming. Anyone else? Yes, sir? You right there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Al Monroe. I live in Fox Point subdivision on Fox Drive South. And just in review, we just want to bring up a few points, and many of them have been noted already, that we feel the density, first of all, 7 to 8 units is much too much. If you put the mathematics to it, if you're doing the comparisons to, I think you mentioned Woodlands of Deer Creek, and I think you mentioned there was 2.8 units per acre. This doesn't add up to that. Secondly, we want to look at an alternative entrance, which is mentioned before, and with the traffic concerns, of course. And then, and I don't know, as you call this an active adult community, although it's not being specific to an age, is it possible that at least one owner would be 55 or older? Doesn't mean the occupants can be, but at least one of the owners could potentially fall into that category. And I believe that's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, you, sir.
My name is Mark Katalski. It's my wife, Nancy. We live 12350 Ridge Road. We're directly across from development. We're the yellow Cape Cod in between. Currently, we can't really back out of our driveway. Okay, we have to turn our vehicles around just so we can get out without getting hit. I mean, these people are going 45 on our street at this point. Okay, well, 45 and up, I guess. Where your street's coming out right now, I mean, for us, I guess would be better than directly in front of our house, which I guess you're talking about proposing that coming on the south side of the chapel, which would be directly in front of my house, which I don't think would work for me, of course. And why couldn't you have two entrances and exits? Why are we just doing one? So everybody's got to funnel out in the same place. Is there a reason for that, or just, okay?
And then there's another entrance and exit to the sub that attach the other sub. You're gonna have two entrances and exits right on top of each other. How does that work out? Because literally, when you're proposing, that subdivision has an entrance and exit right next to it. So we've got, I don't understand how we're gonna have all these entrances and exits on top of each other. And Mark and I have been we've lived there when it was a dirt road. None of these subdivisions were here. So we watched it grow. And the traffic is horrendous.
Well, it's dangerous. I mean, it's, I don't know if we could lower the speed limit too, because it's, I mean, we've actually had animals killed on our road.
Yeah, people
Pets.
that, pets, our pets have died. People that, work at Johnson Controls, I don't think it's called Johnson Controls anymore.
Adient.
What is it called?
Adient.
They come up and down our road. There's a picnic basket down the street from us. They go there for lunch, but they use that as their way of getting to their offices. So you've got a lot of traffic on this road. I just don't see how this is gonna work. I mean, like Mark said, we purposely, when we did our driveway, we put it in cement. We put an L in our driveway so we could turn around and go, because we too have young adult children
And
now.
forget Saturday and Sunday. I mean, we have to go a different route.
Yeah,
I'm sure
we
with everybody else
actually,
that lives here
on
too.
Sundays, we go down
To Powell.
because the church.
And there
They
was a
buy
time, the church on Ridge Road, you couldn't exit southbound. Now you can. And it's been that way for a couple of years. I'm not sure why that changed, or if they just took the sign out, or it's pretty crazy. I mean, it's pretty bad. So, those are all my concerns.
I'm just worried about the traffic and then I mean, and like Mark said.
Yeah, it is.
People just ignore it.
We've had people run into our mailbox.
Our mailbox
I mean,
has been, our mailbox has been hit 4 times. So.
adding more to that
You're
is
adding
scary.
more traffic, and it's not a good, like, just pulling out of our driveway, the people that live on Fox Drive South, they make the right turn on the road. Our house is right there. There's been many a times where they pull out and they're not paying attention, and I've almost gotten clipped. So I
But-
don't know how all these entrances and exits are gonna play out. And
Okay.
I think you guys said Wayne County did a survey.
Okay.
I've seen the little.
Well,
things on
your
the
3 minutes are really up, but you've made your point, and it will be covered. We'll cover it up. But thanks for coming out. Anyone else? Yeah, sign in. Yes, or you. Just wait a moment for her to sign the sheet and.
So my name is Pat Hannon, Gene's husband, 12243 Howland. My point is less directed at the specific and more to the township planner and the planning commission, and that is if there's truly a need for an active adult community, then it seems to me that the role of the planning office needs to be to plan, to think it through more clearly, farther in advance, all of the implication and needs for a different type of zoning process. And because we're hearing all of these other considerations, trying to force fit this into an existing community. So I would ask, when we look at the zoning requirements in the master plan, that you add that in and say, where should these types of communities best be placed? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, you standing in the back?
Joe Van Esley, 12559 Howland Park Drive. I go back further than anybody here. I remember when that property was vacant. It was planned 1 unit per acre. I can remember that happening. I sell land for a living. And I cringed when they said, oh, you're only going to get 1 unit per acre there. Well, if that's the case, then what would be fair? What would be fair would everybody bought a house there based on the density and what they've got right now. What would be fair is build what we have. Now, not too long ago, one of the big issues in the election was what's going to happen on the other side in Washtenaw County? They're going to have 3-4 units per acre. We're not going to give them any sewer. We're going to keep them from getting sewer. So, that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you. We've heard quite a bit about density, so, you know, if anyone has, and the traffic that would cause, there's a lot of surrounding issues around density. So we've heard, I think that message is coming in loud and clear. I mean, you're still free to talk about density if you want, but in the interest of time, if you have some other issues that concern you, well, then come on up. Yes, you, wait. Oh, no, there was a person there in the back that just raised their hand. Yes, you could come up. Yeah, you come and then you right after her.
Hi, my name is Sean Wolford, 12051, excuse me, Howland Park. I happen to be the president of Plymouth Commons. I've had a lot of questions from our homeowners regarding A, the density, B, safety. There's one entrance in and out. The developer has kind of assured us that fire trucks would have no problems in this sub. If there was a major fire at 10 feet apart in any horrible condition, this whole place could go up in next to no time. The developer did mention that they would possibly, a fire truck on that end could go over the curb and through bush tree, anyway, something. And I'm thinking, that does not sound like a professional fire safety project. And somebody did mention in October of 1999, a developer, VLM, came before the board with a potential cluster home development for 19 units. And at that particular time, the board turned them down because of density. Now, this developer wants 78 units, and in this particular property, we know something's going to be developed on it, no question. My concern is the property, and I'm not a surveyor and I'm not anything, there is a lot of water back there, lots of problems that could be potentially hazardous. Now, they're developers, they say they can drain the water all to one corner and they can make a pond bigger and they can do that. Maybe they can. But for the normal homeowner that is now dealing with water issues, water pressures, safety getting out onto this road, which if anybody lives close to there, which most of us do, this road has a slight incline where the sight visibility is very minimal. Now, Wayne County is saying this is the best place to put this entrance. Again, not an engineer, just a person that drives this road. I disagree because it is very dangerous right there. Not only is it right next to our main entrance, where we have 132 homes, people coming and going. Fox Point across the street has, I don't know how many. They have to try to get out there. It's just not a safe entrance or density in our book. So thank you anyway.
Okay, thank you. And sir, the one that you wanted to come up, you're up next. Yep.
Real quickly, my name is Patrick Arella. I live in Plymouth Commons subdivision, and our property abuts directly to the church property that's being proposed for development, Mr. Van. What I'd like to address primarily is, and I'm not sure because this is the first time I heard about it, thank God to the Homeowners Association for sending out an email. I didn't get a notice on the proposed amendment to the restriction. So I'm curious as to what the board, how the board addresses that that discrepancy above even getting to all this, I'm not sure how that happened, so it would be, I wish for an answer to that, and if somebody could provide that, that would be great. Beyond that, beyond going from the fact that there is an amendment, to Joe Van Esley's point and to nope, Cheryl Dove, Miss Dove's point. When we purchased our home back in 1989, and I grew up here too. I've been here since 1973, so I may have been out here jogging before you were even looking at that property for sale, Joe. But the reason we bought our property here was because we looked at the master plan, and the master plan did guarantee that, you know, we took a look at the trailer park. We knew that the condominium association, or the trailer park and the condominiums were there, but nothing, we saw the protection of nothing creeping, that kind of density creeping over into this side of North Territorial. So we made our purchase based on that, and Miss Dove's assertion that there was protected wetlands behind us, that nothing would ever be developed. And I know some of that's puffing, and we you know, some of it may have been planned for development, but we've made a purchase based on what the Planning Commission and the trustees at that time had set in the master plan. And we made a significant investment, not only in that property, but we invested above and beyond what other lots were paying for the seclusion and for the aesthetics of that. Now, it's not our property, and Mr. Aman has made it perfectly clear that that is just unencumbered property ready for development. We get that. But to change, I would like to know what's changed from the decision, if there was a decision first to allow the amendment for the cluster housing. And forgive me for not being up with familiar real estate terms, but is that another name for detached condos? Is it just simply detached condos and we're marketing it as this other term? I would like clarification there, because if it's just detached condos, let's just call it, they're going to put detached condos behind our subdivision. And they may be upscale, but the fact of the matter is, they're detached condos, the very thing we were trying to avoid when we made the purchase in the first place. We've been a part of the community for a long time. We pay our taxes. I haven't heard in the presentation what the benefit is. And if we could expound on what the benefit is, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
And you said you're an adjacent property owner and you did not get notice? Yeah, it's not.
Anyone else that
Not sure
wishes
what
to
it
speak to
means.
this item? You, sir?
They should have gotten notice.
No, you were up already, wasn't he up already? Yeah, you've been up already, haven't you? Oh, yeah, but after, I want to see if there's any first-timers yet. So, are there any first-timers? Yes, you, sir.
Good evening, folks. My name is Tim Boyd. I live across the street in the Fox Point subdivision. The key issue here, the biggest issue, is the density. And Chairman, I want to make a couple points that have not been made about the density yet. The density is 4 times what the current zoning would allow in that, from 18 to 78. But I think the bigger issue that we're worried about, or at least I'm worried about, is the dollar per square foot assumption that people are going to be willing to pay $600,000 for these detached condo units on that property at that level of density. I do believe there is a market for that type of product, but the density that's being proposed is too great. And not only is it too great, but I'm afraid that it will jeopardize the ability of the developer to be able to develop the kind of high-level housing that he's thinking of. When you think of Plymouth Township and think of the developments that have involved 78 units, even single-family homes, they've taken a relatively long time to sell out. And I just really worry about that. I also want to make the comment, the woodlands of Deer Creek is used as a comparison. That's helpful. But remember, that was based on the existing zoning there was R1H, half-acre residential. And that they used that to generate 2.8 units per acre on the condo development. This is R1E, 1-acre residential. So it's not an even comparison in terms of where you're going from the existing zoning to the product. Also, and I want to thank Brian for coming out a couple nights ago and briefing presidents of the two adjacent homeowner associations, but he mentioned this Northville Hollows up on Sheldon, just north of 5 Mile, as a reference. I looked in there on Zillow, and there were 2 recent sales in the last year and a third home that's actually been listed for sale for over a year, and the price has been reduced from $600 to $510. The dollars per square foot range from $167 to $181 a square foot. I think there probably is some premium that would be assigned to these being new houses versus used houses, but I again question the viability of that jump in price given the density that's being proposed on this site. Now, on the other hand, I do think that it is in the best interest of Plymouth Township in our immediate areas to have this developed for residential uses. We know there's been other ideas proposed, which would be a lot worse than this one. So what I really need to do is look at you and the Planning Commission, each of you, and again, the developers that are here. You guys need to work together, come up with something that works for the community, that works for the developer and the church, so the church can get their money out of this, but works for everybody. And that's, I'm really looking at all of you. This is what we're asking you to do, because 78 units is just too dense. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other first-time people? Oop. Okay, then you, sir, your chance to speak a second time. I hope you got a new, fresh thought.
Again, Craig Gerber. Just a clarification on what was presented. I just was wondering, it was mentioned that the intent was 2,500 square foot homes or 2480 to 2,500 min, with the site plans that were presented in the graphics depicted 1,800 square foot units. So I'm just want clarification to which is correct. And then also just make sure that, I'm not sure, there was a comment about the property having a handful of large trees. I guess if you haven't driven there, I'd take a look at that. It's quite wooded, it's quite dense, and they're all quite large. It's actually pretty nicely wooded area, so I just take a peek and look at that and make sure we're doing that. And I don't know nature-wise, I mean, for animals and what's considered invasive species, I don't know if deer and whatnot are, but it's pretty playful home for the deer. Just Monday when I came home, 8 of them were playing right there in the backyard. Just something to consider. I don't know if that's something protectable or should be.
Okay.
Keep it in mind.
Okay, thank you. Any other second timers? Okay, then we will close the public hearing at 8:15. And I'll ask the development team to step up. But before we talk to you, I don't want to get too involved in having another issue come up, but on the text amendment, but the point was brought up. Laura, do you know what the requirement was for public notice on the text amendment, how that was sent out to answer the one question that was raised here?
Just for clarification, the text amendment or the public hearing that's going on right now?
Well, why don't you do both?
Okay, the text amendment is a general text amendment, even though it was applicant initiated for a portion of that amendment. And yeah, it would be prudent to have the attorney review it, but confident that the state statute provides for text amendments to the zoning ordinance to be noticed in the newspaper not less than 15 days for general circulation. If it is a map amendment, which is also in the same section, that's a rezoning, that is required to be noticed within 300 feet. And for this evening's public hearing for the specific property, this was noticed in the paper, posted on the township's website per usual, and also mailed to all property owners within 300 feet. I understand that. Okay, we'll definitely look into that, but that is a duty of the township, and that act is notarized and certified. So there is a public record of that.
Okay.
So they are required to be noticed, is what you said?
For tonight's
For the
public
open,
hearing, yeah.
for this open hearing, right?
For the open hearing.
Yeah.
And just to add as well that all applications and proposed projects are available for review at the township offices on the second floor. There's complete transparency.
I have another question along those lines. So the applicant has a purchase agreement, but they are not yet the legal owner of the property, right?
I don't believe so.
Well, they're up here.
You have a
Do you want to
purchase
answer that
agreement?
question?
It was one of the first points I was going to,
Okay.
Mr. Bertoli asked the question, I'll respond. Yeah, we have a purchase agreement on the property with a date certain for closing and those kinds of things. So under state law and township ordinance, essentially we have a legal interest in the property sufficient to then pursue the application on the property.
That gives you standing?
Right.
Mhm.
And if I can, before we get into this really deep, one thing that I think is an easy fix or an easy question to answer, somebody had raised the issue about what the benefit is to the community, and you did provide to us the proposed recognizable material benefits summary, which is available at the township office. And if you have the emails of the HOA people, you may want to provide them with a copy of that. And hopefully they will share it with their fellow residents, and then you can read it. It's about let's see, a little better than a one-page document that lists what the developer feels are the recognizable benefits. So.
Thank you. I'll try to hit, and Eric Lord is going to talk on the engineering issues of essentially the stormwater, wetlands, the entrance locations, and water pressure. Before that, I'll just address a few of the particular questions on some of the details. Mr. Bertoli asked about the title to the property, but also asked whether this developer's been involved in a density lawsuit with a community with, I think he said 100, 150 miles or whatever. This developer has been involved in various land use lawsuits, some involving density, some involving other issues in various communities by his legal right. And I'm not sure what the implication would be of asking that question, but it's certainly it's a matter of public record, and so that's the answer to that. The open space, there was a question about could there be an effectuation to make sure it was perpetually protected as open space through an easement with the church and or the owners or whatever. And the nature of this transaction would be that once the property is purchased from the church, we wouldn't be able to, once we got through a site plan process, we would then have to go record a master deed on the site that would not only have the plans attached to it showing that which is a general common area, that being all the green space around, everything around the building units that is not privately owned. And that will, in fact, in the master deed provide that that is a general common element and will, for all perpetuity, be kept that way, short of there being amendment to that. And the township in those areas requires them to approve any such amendment that would affect any open space. So it is essentially what was asked. It is a perpetual, not easement, but a perpetual restriction on the property that will maintain that if it shows that it's open space on the plan under the master deed, it will always be that way, short of the township agreeing to some kind of change in it. Also the question was raised regarding Deer Creek. We were not involved in developing Deer Creek. Grand Sackville was not. It's just a sample of a project across the road. This project would intend to have 27-foot wide roads and sidewalks for people to be able to navigate and walk around throughout. So hopefully we respond to that concern.
So is that a standard, excuse me, is that a standard width that was part of?
27 would be the standard Wayne County required width. When you're doing a private road project, you can go under that if you'd like, as the Deer Creek project did. Our experience has been that people would prefer to have a little more room to navigate, and it makes when you're parking a car on the road on non-fire lane side a lot easier and those kinds of things.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me see. He'll deal with water pressure. I'm just going to try to look down the list of other issues. We certainly understand the concerns about the density, and we look forward to that conversation to talk about that. But we looked at the Deer Creek and other examples of that. As it relates to the issue of two exits, Eric will address that. But Cheryl raised the question about, or explained my answer. I think it was her, or maybe not, maybe somebody else, about the fire truck. And Eric will give some more detail, but I want to assure you that what we talk about in the cul-de-sac up area, it is a standard design practice for subdivisions on certain areas like that where it's not an entrance. The fire department requires the actual construction of an area through certain construction practices so that a fire truck actually just goes right over it. This is not some extraordinary, this is a standard design issue, and so if you don't have an entrance there, it just gives them an extra way, and yet you can't put anything in it. Sometimes you'll see grass pavers and things like that. So when I was asked that question, I said, they may require that as part of the design. And actually, I heard from the planner today that the fire chief actually is amending his comments to say that, to something to that effect as it relates to that northern berm. But I'll let Eric talk about the details of that. And Eric, why don't you do that, and then I'll try to clean up.
And just to build on that,
Yeah.
so the plans are reviewed by the fire department. You just heard the initial one earlier today. And what Brian had just indicated, there are several areas in the township where the ground is engineered in such a way that the fire trucks can go over it, not get stuck in mud, depending on the time of year, how much rain, snow, and whatever. So they put in sort of like concrete blocks that the grass can go through it. So you really never see that there is a pathway for a fire truck to go through it because the grass does hide it to some extent. And that has been used in several different locations around the township
And
as
I'm
well.
remiss if I don't also explain, what you have here, that I was also, the question was raised towards the end about they measured a unit of being 1,800 square feet in this. This is, as the planner explained, this is essentially a conceptual design. We're not here at site plan process or whatever, but we're trying to show layout and concept. There are some of these units, these areas that would allow a little bigger than a 2,500 square foot, the larger areas where there's rooms and wise to the side, and some that may not. But our intention is to have the base elevation be a 2,500 square foot ranch. And although it depicts in this conceptual plan this way, this is strictly a conceptual plan. Obviously, if in fact we're allowed to proceed through this cluster process, then by township requirement, we'll come in with much more specific plans regarding the very precise size of every potential building envelope, and we'll know for sure exactly what's involved in that. But right now, these are essentially a layout of a concept that so far demonstrates the ability to do these things, but obviously there would be more required engineering and design to provide greater detail if we were to move forward in the process.
And can you talk about the bonus density? Are you the right person to address that question?
Certainly. About
someone asked, well, how much of a bonus density you're requesting that?
Yeah, and Mr. Boyd and I had some email conversations on this earlier today, and so I'm not surprised he already had to say. Certainly, we are looking to develop a project similar to what you're seeing here, but the fact is we came to listen about the concerns and the concerns that have been raised, and we're planning to go back and really incorporate those into the 2.0 version of this project. But certainly, we are concerned that it have sufficient density to be a sustainable project as it relates to maintaining the general common areas and also essentially the kind of project. John may be able to speak of this more, but there's a lot of research that's been done now on the receptivity of people in active adult communities, and they tend to not want homes as far from the other homes as whatever, and so there's some research around that. So you want why this cluster aspect is particularly attractive, the ability to cluster. But we're looking, based on everything that's involved in this, we are certainly looking for a multiple of density. There's no question. I don't disagree that the density multiple at Deer Creek is 2.8. And so certainly we are aware of that, and we're pointing to that project so we understand what that means as well. And so even though those in Deer Creek, there are some two-story and other stuff in there, we intend to be story and a half so that the massing of the building, it's less obtrusive for the existing homeowners to be looking at or whatever. But certainly we're looking for some level of a multiple of density in that. So.
Okay. We might call you back, but we'll move on.
So just a couple items, I guess, relating to some of the engineering concerns that I heard. One, there was a comment about water pressure issues in the area, and I think what's important is to understand, I guess, where we are in this process, as Ms. Ha laid out early on several steps that we have to go through, and we're at the very, very beginning. So we're learning a lot about the site based on the stage that we are now, and some of the feedback we're getting is important for us to look into from an engineering perspective. So I guess water pressure is something I'd probably defer to Spaulding Decker to know if there's any known issues in the area that we should be aware of, since we'll be hooking into the, public main.
And also, the plan, when we get into a level of detail, is reviewed by our engineering consultant here as well. So there'll be someone here from the township that will look at the water pressure issues as well as some of the drainage issues, the questions that you had raised.
That was the first I've heard of water pressure issues, so I'm going to get with Patrick Felrath, the Director of Public Services, and take a look at this, because that's the first I've heard of any water pressure issues in that area. So we will take a look at that and see what is going on. I don't know if it's something to do with the actual development itself, where maybe it was an 8-inch line that was run through the development and it should have been upsized larger at that time. I don't know. That's something we'll take a look at and try to figure out what's going on.
And certainly, as part of our due diligence, we can take hydrant flow tests out at the road where we're connecting and figure out what the pressures are and see if there's any issues there. But that'll be certainly something that we can do as we get into the engineering of this. From a traffic perspective, again, being at the early stage here, what we've done is sort of prepared a concept plan here with access and met with the road commission to see what their specific requirements would be of us. We've got a few driveway access or road accesses across the street from us. We've got Fox Drive North and Fox Drive South, which both entrances sort of are along our frontage there. And what you have to be concerned with, I know we were talking a lot about left turn conflicts. So if you're coming out of Fox Drive South, for example, and you want to turn left, and if someone was coming out of this development wanting to turn left, you want to make sure that those left turns don't conflict. So the alignment of where those access points are becomes critical for that from a safety perspective. And if, for example, we had a second entrance where that cul-de-sac is of ours on the north side, if there was two entrances, the access on the north side would potentially start to conflict a little bit with Fox Drive North. So the close proximity of those intersections becomes problematic from a traffic perspective. That's sort of a general traffic issue, something that the county is going to be aware of. They're going to be looking at traffic counts in the area. They're going to look at if our development were to somehow decrease the level of service on this road, whereby we need some other mitigation for signals and things like that. That would all be part of what would go into during the process here. So not to say that there's not speed issues and concerns on the road now, but those are things that, again, as we sort of get through the process, those are things that we'll deal with the county, because we have to get permits and approvals from them and all that. So regarding stormwater, I always like to hear what residents are seeing out there relative to stormwater. If there's some low pockets, some areas that we need to be concerned with to specifically address, those are good things, because I can tell you it's our obligation to address not only our stormwater, but make sure we're not mitigating or causing any issues on our neighbors. So part of our process, as we looked at it and as we did talk to Wayne County, was looking at the ponds that exist on the Northridge Church site and utilizing that as more of a regional basin, as opposed to introducing new basins on our property. Don't know if that's how it's going to end up, but that was the conversation that we started as part of the concept for this project. So during that process, we'll hopefully be able to mitigate any other issues that are currently experienced there.
Can you tell me if you'll have catch basins at along the boundaries of this development in the rear, of the homes, for example?
Well, right. What I can tell you is that any of the stormwater, any of the increase in the runoff that's generated from our site, we have to capture. It cannot go off-site. We have to capture that increased runoff. We have to route it through detention basins so that when we're done with this site, it will be better than what it is now from a drainage perspective. That's an obligation, equal to or better than what it is now.
Are you aware of any wetlands that are on that property?
So again, part of our due diligence on the site, we have had our wetland biologists out on the site to take a look. I can't report to you exactly what the findings were in terms of regulated wetland, non-regulated wetlands that may exist on site. But that will be part of what we have to understand and what we have to deal with if there are some that are out there as part of our project. Let's see, what else did I hear?
It was, I don't know. if-
Sidewalks, I think Brian mentioned about sidewalks. I did hear about trails and maybe utilizing some of our open space for some walking areas and things. Right now, our objective with this development from a cluster perspective was the ability of the cluster lots to bring them farther away from the adjacent residents as best as we can, and provide as much screening and planting, supplementing what's there right now. If part of that includes putting some trails through, if that's sort of some feedback that we get from the commission and from some folks, I think that's something we can look at. But for right now, our objective was really just providing as much, separation as we can and be respectful of that.
If I may, then I just, while he talked, I read to make sure I tried to cover other things. The issue on the traffic and the speed on Ridge Road, I can tell you we've had experiences in other developments with the county that when a new project comes in, it actually fortunately gets new eyes on the existing road conditions as well as the project itself. And so we've had instances where our projects have effectively been the trigger for quieting down the traffic on the road by getting a study done to actually lower speed limits and those kinds of things. And so we intend to include in our conversation with Wayne County the review of that speed limit there and what you can do about it. I used to be, in my former life, an assistant county executive and also a county commissioner, so I've had a little bit of experience in that area. And I've also been known to get areas designated as parks because there's an ordinance out there that says when you have a park adjacent to a road, it requires a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. So, so we've been known to affect it that way. So we intend to look at that to see if we can help affect that 45-mile-an-hour speed limit that occurs currently on the road in there to try to solve some of that issue.
And part of the issue, someone else had mentioned about left turns from Northridge.
Right.
That's a
Right
consent
turns.
judgment that you had said, and that was part of the consent judgment, that there was not to be any left turns.
Right.
Or
It's
right
right
turns,
turns.
I'm sorry, right turns. We've
Yeah.
talked so much about the left turns. There were not to be any right turns onto that
Yeah,
road.
and I certainly I've heard that conversation, and there is, I think, still a sign in place, but I'm not sure if it's okay.
It gets ignored.
It's not there. Okay, I don't know. I didn't look a week ago Saturday when I left. So
They
Yeah,
used
it's
to
still
have,
there.
they used to have members of the congregation,
the question,
telling folks to,
yeah, and I know they still do traffic management through a lot of volunteers, and so the question came up about if this is just to call it, if it's a detached condo, call it a detached condo. Well, in fact, technically you can call it a detached condo, but essentially every project around us that is not a platted subdivision is a detached condo. So the commons are essentially, they're a condominium project, that's a detached condo. So if someone wants to go ahead and use the term as in a derogative way, don't do it because you don't want to hurt your own property value. But it is essentially, this would be a detached, which means there will not be two units put together with a common wall. This will all be single detached units, is that. So yeah. So I think I tried to get through that. And Tim also referenced the price points in the Northville Hollow, and I did point out, as it relates to, that's a good example to kind of look at as it relates to the kind of the look and the feel and the fronts or whatever. But that project also is, and I take the point well because it's certainly worth looking at that. But essentially, there are all kinds of other things going on with that project too, with the shopping center coming in behind and those kinds of things as well. So, but we understand it. But as it relates to the kind of the difference of architectural interest and the frontages of it, I think it's a good example for that. With that, I'm prepared to answer any other questions.
yeah, one more you didn't cover, and that had to do with trees. So when you get down, if you get approved, you'll be doing a tree survey. And
We've certainly started the tree survey because it was easier to do while there were leaves on the trees. And so we've got that. So, and when I said a handful, I meant that there are a number of substantial trees out there on that. So absolutely, there's no question on that. The invasive species are plants, not of animals, that tend to try to cross over things like Phragmites and loosestrife and those kinds of things that you normally have to try to control because they will destroy your lawn and your neighbor's lawns and those kinds of things. What we talked about.
Okay. Commissioner Dorsey?
I have some questions and kind of some general comments. So I live west of this, right off of Powell. So I'd probably drive that stretch of ridge probably 40 times a week or so. So I know it very well. One of the issues with traffic was there was a lot of truck traffic going up there when the dump opened, and the township took some steps to actually began ticketing trucks, but the trucks tore up the roads pretty bad. So Ridge has really been beat up pretty bad. I'm curious about, it was an interesting point. You know, when it comes to, I get it, it's unencumbered property. Eventually something was going to be built there. Um, when it comes to price point, you know, that's a business decision. If you think you can sell it for that amount, 240, 250 bucks a foot, I think it came out to, that's pretty high, but, you know, that's a business decision. I thought it was a really good point. It was a very interesting point I've been thinking about, you know, it's property that eventually would be developed on, but some of the residents had indicated that they looked at the master plan when they made investments in their property and did not, and kind of relied on that, and did not have an expectation that there would be, you know, this high of density of housing right next door, or in some cases adjacent to your property. I thought that's a really good point. If it was land that had been, you know, had been designated that way before, I mean, everybody, you know, people move into houses. I buy my house and I don't want anybody else, you know, buying the land next to me and building something. But that's a little bit of a different argument because of the fact that they did rely, research and rely on what was the master plan at that time. The traffic, it's interesting because the people that live along there say that a lot about the traffic, and I know it gets really heavy when church is, you know, right before and right after church. But I don't know that it's my own experience that you know, that it's getting heavier all the time as it gets developed. But I'm not sure that a development here would add that much traffic to it. I didn't hear. I don't think I heard an answer to the question about why there can't be two entrances in and out.
I can address that. So it's not to say that there can't be. I think we start with a layout like this from a basis of need, and you know, there's a certain amount of lots that will trigger the need for a secondary entrance. And as of right now, and again, once we go through the process, if we get with Wayne County and they say that we need a second entrance, then we would be probably looking at where that cul-de-sac is as a potential second entrance. But there's a trigger in terms of the number of lots that require it, and right now we're not there.
Let me jump in there, and I think you probably are aware of this, but it's best for stating. The county starts from the basis of trying to have the minimum number of curb cuts as possible, because their view is every curb cut presents another challenge, and so that's why they have these trigger points, and they really, you know, in some communities the township has dealt with them in other areas. You know, they fight with you on every curb cut you want to have because they prefer not to have them. And so we start from the thing and then saying, what, you know, by the Michigan Land Division Act, we're entitled to one. And so they're like, okay, you got one, but we don't have to give you two. And because when we get to it, anything over that becomes more of an engineering concern. So that's where we start with them. That's their default position.
Is the parcel that the chapel's on, is that all part of one large parcel?
It's its own separate parcel, a 3-acre parcel. It has actually 2 curb cuts. It has a kind of semicircle drive, and there. So.
I think it's a lot. I think it's dense. It's a lot. It's a lot of density. It's 4 times the density. That's pretty dense. At what level? At what level? And I know you're probably not going to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Fifth Amendment rights.
What? You know, what's the number at which this project would continue to be economically viable?
I
if
think,
you can't get to 78.
Yeah, I certainly can't. I'm not Mr. Sakwa, who owns the entity or whatever, but I certainly think there's no question we're going to be having a conversation, particularly as we move forward with the associations and conversations and the township about density. And obviously we'll figure out what that looks like, but it's the salient question.
You done, Bob? Yeah. You got anything at this end? I'll go over to the other end.
Yes, I do. In terms of it being an active adult community, and it seems like it's not age restricted, but it's an active adult community. I think that you're probably looking at also young professionals that might take advantage of that. So I don't think that you're necessarily going to see a 50% drop in traffic, like I think you predicted with an active adult community. I also echo Commissioner Dorshevitz concerns about density. I think with the surrounding properties and the existing master plan, it looks like it's much more dense than what most of the people in this audience had ever expected it would be. That's all I got right now.
Did you have something?
Just one thought, and I think it's really the other side of the density issue, and that is cluster housing option is available if the developer provides amenities to the residents of the community. I see no amenities whatsoever in this development or this drawing that I see here. And the green spaces are all trees. And so to me, I think that's the other side of the density issue, that you've got to come up with a better design that provides amenities for these active adults on site that are really required by the zoning ordinance in order to get your cluster housing option approved. And I don't see anything there like this.
And you're right, this is essentially a conceptual plan that doesn't have the detail of that. But John, do you want to talk a little bit about that, though?
I've done a tremendous amount of empty nester developments like this, none in Plymouth Township.
Don't hit your friend, you almost hit me.
Oh, sorry.
You're not Italian.
Plymouth Township, or Bloomfield Hills,
You can't say
Northville
that.
Township, Canton, in the surrounding communities. And there's been tremendous amounts of market studies done with the ultimate residents, and you're absolutely right. There may be one or two families that move in that aren't part of that, but the developments as a whole are marketed as empty nester. And if you're a family with kids, you're not going to want to move into an empty nester type subdivision and deal with, get off my lawn and all that. It's, you move into a development of similar demographics. So typically, yes, you're absolutely right. Someone comes in, they want this product, they want a nice first floor master, they're going to move there. There's nothing restricting them from doing that. As far as path systems go and everything else, and amenities, typically what winds up happening is sometimes, we'll put in a nice little central, a gazebo, like, typically right now you have that open space coming into the middle there. You put a little pergola up there, a little brick patio with a bench, no one uses it. Their amenity, honestly, is sitting on the front porch, drinking coffee, watching someone else mow their lawn. That's literally what they love that. Path systems, they don't want to have somebody walking in their backyard. So perimeter path systems, especially on something like this, the major amenity or the major intent of this is providing a buffer. What they find after time, and what they do sometimes, if there is a path that's naturally cut, people like to walk through the area. Sometimes after the fact, they'll come back and add wood chips down and create a permanent path. But typically, we don't provide paths because typically they don't want them. Now, if when they start doing their market studies and do pre-sales and they find that that's something they'd like, then after the fact, sometimes the developer will go back in and add something. But I've provided amenities. My profession's a landscape architect. I love designing amenities, but typically they just, they don't get utilized. They just sit there and they become a maintenance headache, and it is what it is. So typically the residents like really nice landscaping.
You're missing my point. My point is the township ordinance requires you to do that.
Yeah, and I was going to say.
And so, whether you like it or don't like it is beside the point.
Yeah, and we're obviously going to have to look at that as it relates to what we can come up in the way of amenities and to who they can serve and whatever to try to make it look so that it works on that. So point well taken. Okay.
One other thought, back to that interesting issue about water pressure that I'd really like to understand, because, and again, just from my own experience, and it's maybe non-scientific, is that the water pressure was terrible when that subdivision was new. In the summertime, your sprinklers couldn't even reach across the lawn. But once the second water tower went in next to Home Depot, it stabilized the pressure. And if it didn't do that in that neighborhood, I'd be really curious to know the reason why.
That's why I'm going to get with Patrick. I put this note down right away to get with Patrick to try to find out what it is. Like I said, this is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah.
And I need to know if he's heard it. I want to see if they have any kind of hydrant data so that we understand what the pressures are in the area.
Yeah.
It's as important to us, obviously, too. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone at this end have comments? Mr. Postel?
There have been a number of very successful cluster option programs in the township, generally of much smaller size. But the two overriding things that are looked at is one, that the land couldn't be developed in the normal sense because of some unique features. I don't see that here at all. Also that the clustering was to preserve natural features that would be of value, whether they're used or not, but be of value to the prospective purchasers of there. I don't have a problem with the cluster option. I don't have a problem with your concept, but it's nowhere in there does it say one of the purposes of the cluster option is to increase the profitability of the developers. And there's just too many places in, too many units in there with a significantly lower number of units. You could provide more features and things that would be of value to people, but it would be costly for you to do that. And that's where I don't see where you're really have a good logic for using the cluster option.
Yeah. I think. Come on,
You know,
Mr.
something
Ansel.
else we haven't discussed is sewer in capacity, configuration, etc. We only get one chance to get sewer right. Have you taken any steps yet to see if that's feasible on that site, especially with that density?
No, we haven't gotten into if there's any specific sewer issues in the area. I'd love to hear if we know that answer, but I'm not aware of any. I haven't heard of any, but that'll all be part of our process.
What do you know, Dave?
The older I get, the more I flush the toilet.
I don't know of any sewer issues in the area. There is a substantial, there is a substantial size sewer out in Ridge that they would be tying into. I have not heard of any sewer issues out there. So,
But it's something that the developer will look at.
what we have to remember too is at this stage, we were presented with concept plans and we're not asked to review engineering detail yet. Hearing about the water, that's a concern that we need to look into to see what is going on, you know. So that's the first we've heard of that, so.
I too think that it's very dense for what we're speaking of. I hope there's a middle ground, or I hope there's something that could be negotiated.
Commissioner Bremery.
I had a couple things. Laura, could you talk about the master plan and what density the master plan has for this property?
The master plan is, the site is designated everything west of Ridge for low density, I believe, which is approximately 1 acre.
1 acre, okay. And given that the plan that they come forward with next time could be very different than this, will there be a second public hearing?
One of the options is to, since the public hearing was open this evening, is to continue the public hearing for a future meeting and not close it at the end of tonight's discussion. All future meetings would be public, of course.
True, but may not be noticed
to the letter sent to the adjacent property owners?
If, similar to what we've done in other cases, where there's been multiple meetings on a residential or commercial project, if the homeowners associations would like to get in touch with the planning department here at the township and send an email, we're happy to provide updates for meetings as they come up and send the agenda along.
Okay, but then there also wouldn't be notices in the newspaper, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and we did close the public hearing earlier
I
tonight.
I can
so
reopen the public
can we
hearing.
reopen
Yeah, we'll reopen the public hearing so that doesn't, they'll be back, with another conceptual plan probably based on the comments that they've heard from all of you and from us this evening. So we'll consider this still an open item as far as the public hearing.
Commissioners?
I'd definitely like to hear what everyone has to say about a revised plan.
Right, and I'm presuming since, I give you credit for reaching out to the homeowners. I do agree. This is a pretty dense proposal that you're putting forward, but I do give you points for having an open discussion with the homeowners association out there and further discussions with the township. And do you have email addresses of the homeowner association presidents?
I believe so, but if not, 2 of them. So yeah, we'll make sure we get all of them. So yeah.
And so hopefully you can keep those folks informed as to where you are with the process, as well as I'm sure with the township as well. And our agendas are on the web, so you can look at it. We meet always on the third Wednesday of the month, and you can always feel free to call the planning department at any time to see what will be on the agenda if you don't have access to a computer or whatever you were going to.
Just to add, sorry.
The other property owners that don't have homeowners associations, if they could also sign up for some type of communication.
So I think they gave the names and addresses, and I'll make sure we get that from the record, and we're communicating with them as well. But if they want to give me, I have cards. If they want to email me, we can connect it that way as well.
Okay.
And then, and to add to that, I just want to thank everybody for coming out because it really means a lot. That it's really important that you come out and be heard, and it does have an impact on us.
Commissioners, if I may just interject, if it was the commission's wish that we would renotice, although not required to by state statute, the planning department is happy to do that and work with the clerk's department to make sure that that's noticed in time.
Yeah, let's err on the side of more communication rather than less.
Okay, will do.
Any other comments or questions from the commission? Okay, well, I think you see how we all feel on the commission and most of the folks here, if not all the folks. And again, thank you for reaching out to all those folks, and hopefully we can reach a situation that can make everyone happy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the sake of the rest of your agenda, if there anyone who wants to get my card so you have my email, I'll meet you outside.
Oh, okay. And we're going to take a short recess of about 5 minutes.
Oh, we're going to move.
We're not going to table anything. There was no motion. No.
Okay.
We don't need a motion.
Interesting.
Testing? Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like me to start over?
Yeah, why don't you? Thanks.
Okay. The application request for PC 2318 is for a temporary special land use, just over 2,000 square foot modular office building, which would augment the existing facility at 939 South Mill Street for the operations of a project management, engineering, and construction company that's focused on the installation of communication infrastructure. And they have received a 36-month contract in the Metro Detroit area that is requiring an additional 6 to 10 office-related employees during normal business hours of operation from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And as needed. And these additional office workers, the applicant has stated that they cannot be accommodated in the existing facility, but are critical to the successful operation of the contract that was awarded. The subject site itself is just under 4 acres. It's located in the larger industrial complex at 939 South Mill Street, and is surrounded by similar zoning districts. There are 6 different criteria standards.
Hey, Laura, pardon me. I think there's typos because it's Henkels and McCoy. And it says Henkels and Malloy, right? Are they here? No. I do some business with Henkels and McLeod, unless it is Henkels and McCoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. HMI. Is that what happened?
Oh,
And on the cover sheet, it says Henkels and Malloy.
then it must have been taken that way from the application page.
Okay,
It
just
wasn't,
to clarify.
okay, thank you. We'll note that for the file. There are 6 special land use criteria that are provided in section 2.7 of the zoning ordinance and are subsequently detailed in the review. Overall, we don't have an adverse reaction to the proposed special land use, mainly on the basis that this is a temporary use and will allow the successful operation of a township business. However, the proposed modular unit is aluminum sided, and the Planning Commission is charged with finding justification for the proposed facade materials as they don't currently meet our standards, but given that it's a temporary structure, there might be justification in that waiver. Additionally, this building is behind, or this proposed modular unit would fall behind the existing building at 939 and is not visible from the public right-of-way on Lily Road, which we find is further justification for the facade materials and their temporary nature. However, this recommendation is based on such a waiver from the Planning Commission, and then also the 4 criteria that are listed on page 5 of McKenna's report. The first being that the outstanding items in the report would be addressed, that the applicant would set up a monthly reading of their fire hydrant meter for the purpose of keeping their usage and monthly permit fee payment up to date. This was required and so noted by the DPW foreman. And that the addition of landscaping and screening along Lily Road is provided on a revised plan for township review. The applicant has proposed some arborvitae along the southern portion of the modular unit. However, that would be a temporary installment and thus not really contributing to the environmental quality of the site or the beautification. And so recommending that landscaping would be needed for this, but that it be designated to a more permanent and visible location where it would have a greater effect. Elsewhere on the larger conglomeration of property that is part of the site or along the Lily Road street frontage, just north of this area at 939 South Mill, the existing industrial office was recently renovated extensively, and new landscaping and streetscaping applied to that portion of the site. So that's a similar treatment that we would envision following the rest of Lily Road. And then the 4th condition is that the temporary modular structure would be removed. There would be a sunset clause as part of the special land use, and that date would be determined by common grounds from when the 36-month contract would end and what would be just what would be satisfactory to the Planning Commission.
Okay. And they've received a communication from the fire department, and they don't have any objections from a public safety perspective, and the applicant is here. Yeah. Okay, do you have any presentation or comments? It's okay. Do you have any comments or presentation to make? If you can come up, just I mean, we have the plans. Oh, okay.
you need to.
Be
speak
talking
into
to
a
that mic.
microphone.
Hello. My name is George Petkuski. I'm the architect helping with the project. One of the issues with the landscaping along Lily Road, we weren't quite sure exactly to what extent that would be required and how we could implement that. And I think that's something that we could maybe work with the planning department to determine the extent of the landscaping.
Okay, what do you think about, Nora, about the landscaping?
We would apply the provisions of the landscape ordinance, Article 28, along that streetscape, similar to what we did along the northern portion where the
Pittiger, is that what you're?
correct, yep, where that office building was remodeled.
Okay.
One of the things that kind of caused a little bit of confusion for us was that because the nature of being a temporary building with the 3-year sunset clause, we're sort of requested to implement a permanent landscape improvement to the property itself. It seemed a little bit maybe overreaching, I guess I could say, but maybe not. I mean, we're willing to consider it as long as we know what the scope of it is and it's not sort of unlimited in terms of what that landscape would be provided. I mean, currently there is lawn and some trees in front of Lily Road. I'm not sure how much more we need to add to it.
So we're talking Mill Street, though. You both keep referring to it as Lily Road. It is Mill Street.
It is Mill Street.
So why is it temporary? I mean, I know it's a modular building, but.
Because it's a 3-year contract.
3-year contract.
And then the other issue was what parking, and that's easily resolved. We have about 28 parking spaces with 4 handicap spots allocated. The surface is gravel, so it's really difficult to stripe. But if you plot it out, there's 28 spaces. There would be additional 10 spaces behind the building adjacent to the modular building that's being added to accommodate the 6 to 8 people that would be working there. So the parking is quite adequate, is what I'm saying.
What's the nature of your business?
Maybe the client can speak to it. It's fiber optics being provided in the area.
Do you guys do DAS installations out of your group?
Comments from the commission?
I have one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've driven by your site, and it appears that as our engineer, or not our engineer, our planner mentioned, that building, temporary building, would not be visible from the road, correct?
Correct.
I mean,
It's not
you would
visible
be
at all.
hidden behind your building.
Yeah, and we
for all
actually
intent
set it back
purposes.
from the north side 10 feet inward, so you really don't see it at all
Right,
from the road.
Okay, so, thank you.
Anyone else? So Laura, on the landscaping, what are exactly, still a little confused about that. Are you asking to
too.
put together a landscaping plan, or what is, what's the status of the landscaping?
They would submit a updated plan, taking the existing plan that you have in your packets tonight and updating that to show where landscaping improvements would be made. And maybe as a temporary use, it would be 50% of the requirements. But as an improvement, this would be considered an improvement to the existing site. The proposed modular building, there does need to be some other improvement, closer compliance with ordinance standards. Because right now, this site alone, there is no landscaping, and just the temporary planning of landscaping wouldn't achieve the intent of our landscape ordinance. So taking a broader approach and applying that landscaping where possible along the site where it could be permanent, to bring the site closer into compliance as it is being improved.
So what kind of guidance can you give them as to, what you're looking for as far as the amount of landscaping?
Well, we'd have to take a look at, they'd have to designate the existing landscaping on the site, first of all, to see what they could already count towards landscaping requirements. And then if you wanted to make it 50% of the requirement or 75% of the requirement along Mill Street, then that would be permissible.
So it probably doesn't matter, but just in the interest of disclosure, I am currently right in the middle of a contract negotiation with this company to install a large system on behalf of Beaumont. So I don't know if I need to abstain from it. I want them to do the work for us.
Sounds to me like you got a conflict of interest.
I may, yeah.
So where is the landscape you're talking about? Because I don't understand what your building is. I mean, there's about 16 buildings there. Unfortunately, I didn't drive the site like I usually do. I understand that's where the temporary building is, and then that's your permanent building. Where do you front on Mill Street?
They don't front on Mill Street per se, but this parcel is part of the larger parcel under common ownership.
Oh, it's all common ownership? So what you're proposing is that because they want to put that temporary building for 3 years behind their other temporary building.
No, it's a permanent building.
I understand. That you want them to do something out on the road front. Is that the idea?
I'm recommending that would be the logical approach as they are proposing.
So do you own all this property?
They lease a portion of it. The north portion is leased by other people.
Midigear owns all that.
So who's going to install it? The owner?
The applicant would be responsible for installing it, just as if they were responsible for installing on their lease portion here.
So, I mean, I think we're amenable to providing some landscaping along the main thoroughfare. We just need to kind of get a definition of the scope of it, and maybe we can work, we can present you with a landscape plan, and you can administratively approve it, or we can conditionally approve the temporary use of the special use building, and then work with the planning department to achieve the goal, whether it's 50% or 75% in terms of what the landscape is required.
Well, do you think the landowner would want you to add landscaping on the part that you're not leasing?
Here's the reason. You're not compliant with our current zoning ordinance. And this gives us, wait a second, let me just finish. This gives us an opportunity to bring you closer to compliance and or the owner of the building closer to compliance. In order for you to accomplish what you want to accomplish, the township has the right to say, well, yeah, that's all right, but in addition to that, you need to bring yourself closer to compliance. It's much like, as an example, on Ann Arbor Road, we have a no pull sign that is part of our Ann Arbor Road ordinance, but there's many pull signs still out there, and that's because they haven't improved their property. If they go to improve their property, we're going to make them take that pull sign down. That's probably why they haven't improved their property too. So, but am I stating that incorrectly? Is that not the basic idea?
The basic idea is to bring the site into closer compliance because they are requesting a special land use, and then
Right,
there's
right,
a
yeah.
discretionary component to the Planning Commission for special land uses. But also, if we wanted to follow the strict compliance of the zoning ordinance, then this entire site, because of the special land use, would be required to be brought up to code, which would mean paving of the gravel parking lot, striping of all the parking spaces, outdoor lighting, full landscaping for this site, even if it means that it isn't visible from the Mill Street streetscape, which just north of this area, there are single-family homes that front on the street. And it was brought to our attention that when the improvements were made just north, that the city of the Plymouth community was very receptive and happy to see those streetscape improvements. So I think any improvement along this area, especially if it was concentrated on Mill, would be advantageous to the larger community. But if the strict letter of the ordinance was followed, then this property would be required to be brought up into full compliance.
Right. So, but basically, your recommendation is not full compliance. It is some mitigation of what's in front of this property. Am I right?
Due to the temporary nature of the proposed use.
Right. Okay. So I guess what we as a commission have to decide is what percentage is the proper percentage of landscape under our current landscape ordinance for them to get approval of their temporary building. And as far as the design is concerned, I think, it's in my opinion, that that could be handled by our administrative committee or administratively once we decide what the percentage is. I guess I'd recommend the 50% level.
And you don't think you'll have an issue with a landowner to put this land, you haven't had discussions with him? Well, it is a requirement, so the only discretion we have is to what percentage, landscaping you have to put in, because you're putting in a temporary building. And you really don't have it's sort of subjective as to how much landscaping they're going to put in, isn't it?
Laura, could you be more specific as to typically what do you expect them to do?
Well, for instance, there's
Plant 10 arborvitae or something like that. Is that what you're after?
Yes, there are specific standards in the landscape ordinance, like X amount of trees for every 40 feet of linear frontage, on Mill Street. So we would take a look at what's there and what's needed to be provided. If the applicant is not interested in doing streetscaping along Mill Street, which I think would be in the better long-run interest for both communities, then they are certainly welcome to do landscaping on their site, but in a more permanent location as part of their lease agreement. And in that respect, we would take a look at parking lot landscaping, any screening of the parking lot areas.
I think the landscaping would be best served if it was concentrated along the public right-of-way, because if you bring in the landscaping in the yard itself, the yard is really sort of a rough and tumble yard, and it's not going to really benefit. I think most of the landscaping is going to die.
Doesn't the school, isn't there a school property garage directly, is that on the Bittiger property too, that the little school property?
Just to the west?
Just to the north. There's a little garage there, I think.
This?
So the only logical, when you drive by this site, you can't go in because it's gated, but when you drive by it, the logical place for any landscaping for screening would be in the front because it does look looks pretty tacky in the front, so. And Bidiger did such a wonderful job on his that,
They did, and it was very well received by both communities.
kind of complement what's already there.
Very much so.
So 36 months from when? Okay, because we also have to be specific about when you have to get rid of this building at the end. So April 21? Okay. Yeah, but you're asking for a temporary special use. So you're going to have to get rid of this building after a certain amount, whatever the, oh.
Main building doesn't.
Oh, yeah, the main building, that has nothing to do. The special use is for that yellow section there.
And that's the part that expires in April 23rd.
2021, you said?
So not 36 months.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments, concerns, questions? Are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the special land use under 2318, 1218 with the following conditions. The conditions, as all the conditions listed in the planner's report and the fire department report, but in particular that the outstanding items noted herein be addressed and revised in a special land use concept plan for the township review administratively, including the provision for 2 ADA parking spots on the site. The applicant will set a monthly reading of their fire hydrant meter for the purpose of keeping their usage and monthly permit fee payment up to date. The addition of landscape and screening along Mill Street, compliant with 50% of the requirement in our landscape ordinance, and similar to the property directly to the north of the property in question. And the temporary modular structure is to be removed by May 30th, 2021. And the applicant, which is approximately 30 days after the end of their 36-month contract.
Is there support?
Support.
Okay. I just realized, thanks to Commissioner Barberino, that this is also a public hearing, so we didn't have that. So before we vote, I'll open the public hearing at 9:29. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak to this item? Okay. They all left. So we'll close the public hearing at 9:30. Any discussion on the motion? Did you, yeah, you did that. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you.
Well, good luck to you. And congratulations on your contract.
Oh, Bob Dershowitz.
Oh, Bob
abstained.
Dershowitz, what did you do?
I didn't vote.
Okay. Okay.
If that's
So you
okay.
abstained?
Yeah, I'm supposed to ask for permission to do that.
Oh, So,
Can I have permission to abstain?
yeah, do we have to have a
Yes, you
motion on that?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, you have.
It passed, it passed anyway.
Okay. But make sure it's noted that Commissioner
Yeah, that I
Dorchester
noted.
abstained. Okay. Well, good luck to you.
I need these guys to build my system. I got my ass chewed out today.
Okay, the next item is application 2317-1218, Kames Court, and the applicant cannot be here. But is there anyone here, it's also a public hearing, is there anyone here that wishes to speak to this item? I'll open the public hearing at 9:31. No one here. I will leave the open hearing open, or the public hearing open. I don't see any reason, Laura, for you to read your report. The applicant isn't here. There isn't anyone here that wishes to speak to this.
Yes, if I could just add that we had a number of concerns, both myself and Dave Richmond from Spalding to Decker and the fire chief, there were a number of concerns that we identified with this preliminary project. And we've requested that the applicant, once the health concerns are resolved, that they make an appointment to come in and have a meeting with us. Because as presented, this is not something that we can even provide a full quantitative review on for you.
So once the health issues are cleared up, they know that, they'll be coming in to see you?
So it's recommended that this application, because of the public hearing notice, that this be tabled for up to 12 months.
So, housekeeping, so we need a motion to table this?
Correct.
And we didn't do a motion on the tabling of the first one. So can we table that now? Or, it's an open hearing, or a public hearing, so we didn't take any action on it. What should we do?
Well, I think Dave Richmond's right, postpone.
Pardon?
Postpone is the correct
Postpone it
verbiage, yes.
as a motion?
Mhm.
And the same with the first application?
Correct.
Okay.
Or should we save the package, or will it be a new package?
Pardon me?
The package of information, should we save that, or will it be an entirely new package?
Well, you'll receive new documentation, yes.
Okay, so should we postpone this one for up to a year?
Correct.
Okay. So is there a motion to postpone application 2317-1218?
I move we postpone that application 2317-1218 for 12 months.
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Patton, supported by Commissioner Barberina to postpone said application for up to 12 months. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. And then we'll just go retroactively. Is there a postponement for application 2319-1218, the Regency at Ridge Meadows?
Mr. Chairman, I move we postpone 2319-1218 for up to 12 months.
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Pratt, supported by Commissioner Barberina to postpone said application for up to 12 months. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. I guess that just is housekeeping to keep our records open. Okay. Next, another public hearing. Text amendments to the zoning ordinance, number 99, Article 12, the neighborhood shopping district. And your report?
Thank you. This is the second public hearing that we've had on the C1 Neighborhood Shopping District text amendments. We had one earlier in the fall of 2018, and since then, we included some standards on outdoor cafes and dining areas that previously weren't noticed, which is the reasoning for the second hearing this evening, and consideration of the full text amendments to Article C1. The documentation in your packets shows with track changes, the proposed text to be added, and the standards for the outdoor cafes. Those are listed on page 66. And then at the end of the packet is a 2-page application. This would be approved by the Board of Trustees, but was included in this packet for your review to see how administratively this ordinance would be applied for and subsequently reviewed. The standards that are on page 2 of the outdoor cafe and dining application are the evaluation criteria and standards that are included in the zoning ordinance amendment. So this is what would be presented to an applicant when applying for an administrative site plan. If the applicant could not meet these standards or were asking for deviations, then they would come back to the Planning Commission for special land use consideration of that outdoor dining. And the restaurants with alcohol, those have remained the same since the fall. No changes are proposed to those as previously noticed.
Yes, go ahead.
Laura, I received an email today advertising for Bush's, the grocery store in Canton. And they do serve alcohol there. And the advertisement said that you can now grocery shop while you drink.
Yeah.
Is that something that I forwarded it to Dennis?
Oh, you did? I didn't
Yeah, I did.
see it.
I just, right before the meeting.
Oh, okay.
So is that something that would be permitted at, say, the picnic basket, that someone could browse through the store while having a beer? Or is the alcohol consumption limited to the bar, tavern, lounge area?
This would be limited, I believe, to the bar, tavern, and lounge area. But I'm not sure what liquor license the Canton establishment had received, and if there were certain parameters about the amount of alcohol or the area, the enclosure, how that truly works. So I'd have to check with the clerk's office to see how that would be applied in the township.
So would that be more in the liquor license as opposed to the zoning ordinance?
Yes, part of the, from what I understand, because the planning department doesn't review the liquor license, that's a function of the clerk's office. But from what I understand, if a liquor license application is made, like let's say for a gas station to sell alcohol, or a convenience store, I'm sorry, to sell alcohol, like 7-Eleven, in a commercial district, then that application will get flagged and sent up to planning to make sure that it complied with zoning ordinance standards, because that's one of the things the state looks at. So I'm not sure of the specifics of the license application that you would file to have a strolling beverage.
Did they actually call it a strolling? Because I would imagine that, okay, so in Canton, the Bushes has the smokehouse, they have their restaurant. When you look at Kroger's, they added their little bar at Ann Arbor Road in Sheldon where they will do taste testing.
And you have to stay right there.
But there's nowhere else you can actually go. You mean you can't take your glass of wine away with you? And I don't know that, is Bush's trying to say that you can?
That's
actually
the email I received tonight.
I think it may be they're stretching the truth a little bit, because I find that hard to believe. I don't know of any place I've ever seen where you stroll around and
I've seen them in Florida.
drink.
Here. It's right here. It says.
Oh, that one. That's Las Vegas. Yeah. New Orleans. Yeah.
It says sip and shop. Grab a beer, wine, or cocktail from JB's and enjoy while you shop.
Wow.
And that's
pretty specific. Yeah.
That's pretty blatant. So I just want to
So
make
that's
sure
now.
that
You can do that now.
you can do that now. That's as of
So much for Kroger's, eh? No.
right.
Oh,
And
they'll be doing it.
There's places in Ohio I've been to that have this. people grocery shop for hours and hours and hours. But anyway, I just want to make sure, having seen that, is that something that needs to be addressed in this ordinance since we're doing this now?
So if there are additional standards by the, by Lara, through the state of Michigan for that licensing, those would be in addition, or they would take precedent over standards that we have. But if we applied this scenario, for instance, to the picnic basket, and they applied to the state for the strolling license, as this reads, as long as the area where they were receiving the alcohol was not greater than 30% of the total gross floor area, and that they weren't allowed to serve it between these hours, and that the main purpose of the facility was a grocery market, then that would be permitted, provided they met all the other state standards.
Yeah, because I just lost it because it said that it's 30, I saw the 30%. Well, that's where the service would be, but that doesn't prohibit them from taking it out of the service area to
Or to
someplace
sit
else.
outside? In the outdoor cafe, could you sit outside with the?
Well, there wouldn't be, if there were permanent seats or, you know, a high top bar area or something that was positioned throughout the market that you could stop at with your beverage, then that would have to be considered as part of the 30%. But if that remaining area is still primarily used for shelving for market goods, then that wouldn't count towards the 30%.
Yeah, I found this is the service of alcohol is considered an accessory use to the principal use of the building and may not occupy more than 30% of the total. So so is the service of alcohol confined to the 30% of the floor space? So if they serviced in a small area, they could take that alcoholic beverage and just travel around the building
Or out to the patio
or out
area?
to the patio.
Well, the patio would be included in the floor area, and any area where you would be sitting or standing as a permanent location and having service, you know, brought to you or available to you, that would be considered part of the 30%. But if you were strolling down, you know, an aisle with goods on both sides of you, I don't believe that would be interpreted as a service area.
Well, as you remember, that was one of my issues on the 30%, that somebody could, you know, loophole that around. Would it work if we said the service or consumption of the served alcohol? And so that if you allowed people to walk around the big building, that whole area is now included and then violates the 30% area.
I suppose you could do that. I think maybe just a little clarification from the commission. Is that something that we want to permit or not? The traveling of alcohol in a market.
Well, whatever we do, we're talking about one particular
application.
Yeah. Would this impact a place like Kroger?
If
Or Bush's, our own Bush's?
If it had the provision added with the service or consumption of alcohol to the 30%, then that would prohibit a Bush's from operating in such a fashion as the one in Canton.
Yeah. I mean, I only know of one place that does that, and that's down south, and it's a big joke. Everybody can have beer and pizza while you shop, and it's kind of trashy.
The one in Ohio is really nice.
I've heard in
like sit-down
California.
restaurant. I just want to make sure.
It's overreaching, I think.
Yes, I think we're chasing our tails.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I'm not concerned about whether somebody's walking around with a glass of wine. The whole idea of the ordinance for my, and this is zoning now. I don't want to, I think we're overreaching into the area of controlling alcohol. Well, that's not.
Beyond our
That's not our-
purview.
That's not
Yeah.
our job. From my perspective, it's just not. I think that we did restrict to the 30% for service. That's going to restrict it as much as we can restrict it, I think, under the zoning ordinance. What they do with their liquor licenses and all that, that's beyond our purview.
Yeah. I would have a tendency to agree as well, because I'm concerned, I think we're focused on Picnic Basket because it's in the middle of a neighborhood, but then when you look at Kroger or Bush's, then it does seem like we're overreaching. And it's beyond our scope of work, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up since
Yeah.
since this is when we're approving this, be the easiest time to make a change needed.
Okay, any further discussion before we open it up for public comment? All right, so is there anyone here that wishes to speak to this issue? I'll open the public hearing at 9:46. Okay, hearing none, we'll close the public hearing at 9:47. Are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, like to make a motion to recommend to the Board of Trustees to, in favor of the amendments to Article 12C1 as outlined in the January 10th letter from the McKenna.
Is there support?
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Postel and supported by Commissioner Harp to recommend approval of the text amendment, Article 12 of ordinance number 99. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
Bush starts getting a lot of new business and stuff. You watch everybody else.
Yeah, they'll all do it.
I think we should do a field trip to Bush's, all of us. And
It's interesting.
But I'd take them to task if they did that.
But I can't imagine, there's got to be something in their liquor license that allows them to do that.
Well,
Because, it's like, well, in New Orleans, they have an open carry law, right? You can walk around the streets with an open container, which is not typical, but, it's interesting.
if somebody were to do it, I think the service could be interpreted to include not just, handing it to them, but allowing them to consume it on the rest of the property, and you could shut
Well,
it down.
and you see a lot of places where, no alcohol beyond this point, that kind of thing. So I wonder if it's not a liquor license issue.
Okay, moving on to old business, application 2296-0618, the Verona Park. And Ms. Howell, your report.
Thank you, Chairman Sobolski. This application is one the commission is familiar with. It is the final development plan being presented this evening for consideration for the previously approved cluster housing option for 14 single-family detached units just west of Beck Road and north of Edinburgh Drive. As a reminder, the site was rezoned from the R1S district and then subsequently went through the cluster housing process. The final step lies with the Board of Trustees, should the Planning Commission grant approval this evening, where the final development plan would be approved as well as the cluster housing agreement and the master deed and the bylaws. And the applicant is working on those and has already received initial feedback from the attorney. So they are in a good position to move forward with the Board of Trustees following a recommendation by this body. There are just a few minor site plan items that remain outstanding, but we're confident that those could be handled and addressed prior to going to the Board of Trustees for final consideration. I think there might be some additional trees that would be required to be provided. It looks as if there might be some double counting in some areas, but that is a minor issue that could be remedied. The applicant has stated that the ADA, or excuse me, that the pedestrian pathway to the pergola area north on the site will be an ADA accessible material. This just needs to be detailed on the plan, but that is their intent to provide that. And then payment in lieu of sidewalks along Edinburgh and Verona Court will be required prior to final stamp approval. But they have acknowledged that this will be required as part of the process. And given that there is limited connections in this area, that payment in lieu would be best served elsewhere in the township. For instance, connecting an existing gap, or perhaps in one of the parks, improving the sidewalks there. So that would go into a designated fund for the township's discretion at a later time. Just one item for Planning Commission consideration is that as part of the cluster housing option, it was required that a berm be provided along the northern property line. And due to public comments made at previous meetings. And in finalization of the site plan in this northern area here, in order to actually move the earth and create that size of a berm, they would have to remove the existing vegetation along that strip. In some areas, that is quite significant. So the applicant instead has proposed to keep the existing vegetation and then infill. You'll see on their landscape plan that they provided in your packet that there is additional evergreen plantings in this area along the entire northern property line to help buffer that property. But that waiver for a berm is requested and should be included in this evening's motion if the Planning Commission finds justification in that less trees will be removed and impacted that are of quality and are mature. And then a cost estimate for all site landscaping and project amenities, would need to be provided. One other item for consideration of the Planning Commission is on-street parking. The fire department and the applicant have been working on this matter along the northern portion of Verona Court and along this portion of the cul-de-sac. No parking signs will be posted, and the mailbox cluster is also right here, so that would never be blocked. So you wouldn't be allowed to park on that side of the street, but on the southern portion of the street, and between these driveways here, you would be able to do on-street parking per the fire department. And this would allow for approximately 5 additional parked guest vehicles, in addition to the 2 garage spaces and 2 driveway spaces that are provided for each unit.
So what are you proposing? They park on the grass?
No, I'm sorry, Dennis. This the area in between here.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
The roadway is wide enough to have one side on-street parking. So no parking signs will be posted on the northern portion
I got that.
and around the cul-de-sac. But on the southern portion, you could conceivably have five guest parking spaces, temporary, of course, and then also in the driveways.
Okay.
And that was just one question that had been raised by the Planning Commission at the tentative site plan review, where the guest parking would be accommodated, given that this is a smaller cul-de-sac design. So provided that the Planning Commission finds that approach sufficient, then no other detail is needed for that item. And then, as shown on the landscape sheets, the applicant is proposing a site entry feature, which are permitted, especially in cluster housing options. However, the height of the entry feature is regulated to 4 feet per the ordinance, but as a cluster housing option, the Planning Commission can and has historically granted different varying sizes for entry features. The proposed entry feature for this project ranges from 8 feet 8 inches at a maximum down to 5 feet and 4 inches. And the feature is constructed completely of masonry materials. It's located along one of the township's busiest major thoroughfares, and it's placed outside of the clear vision triangle for incoming and exiting vehicles. Based on those parameters, we are recommending that the Planning Commission grant a waiver to the site entry feature and that it's appropriate scale for this development. The proposed units will all feature masonry materials. Building elevations, I believe, were included in your packets. And so they are meeting all the facade standards. And it was just requested that some samples of the materials be brought for the Commission's consideration since they weren't included at tentative. And then the last item is the cluster housing contract, which I stated earlier is already being finalized with Kevin Bennett, the township attorney. So provided that the parking and the signage and the northern landscape berm is acceptable to the Planning Commission, then we strongly recommend that application 2296 for Verona Park will be recommended to the Board of Trustees for final consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Richmond, your engineering report.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have reviewed the above, the plan set with the latest revision date of December 21st, 2018, and received in our office on January 3rd, 2019. The engineering plans are approved. All permits have been received, so we therefore recommend final site plan approval.
Okay. And they've received a communication from the fire department and saying that plan deficiencies must be corrected before the plans are approved. Any applicant is here? Okay, you want to come up? So you're in agreement with the outstanding items, and we'll move forward on those?
Yes, I'm Jack Carnahan here on behalf of Centennial Home Group.
Okay.
We're in full agreement with that. I think we have miscommunicated something on the actual trees. We tried to shade some of the trees on the landscape plan. I don't think the shading showed up enough, but we did not count in the replacement trees the trees that are required to go along Beck Road. Those are not in that total count. I think that's what Laura and I have talked about several times. And I'm ready to meet with her as soon as we can and go through the actual numbers. We do have more than enough trees. And I went over that again with my landscape architect 3 days this week now. So we've been making sure of that. But all the rest of the items we're in full agreement with. We have no issues on any of that. We did bring a couple samples of materials. These units are going to be really nice. They are not going to be 40% brick or 50% brick or stone like I believe your ordinance only requires 40. They're going to be 100%. The lower first floor is going to be entirely brick or stone. They're going to be very attractive. They need to be sold. As was discussed earlier, we can't be here for 5 years selling 14 units. So in the representations that were presented in your packet do show the type of materials that we're going to do. They're going to be very nice. Brought just a couple samples of things. I wasn't sure what else exactly was required. And some of these are manufactured stone. You can get, I think we all know what bricks are. We're going to do this so that each unit looks different than the others. There were 4, I only had drawings of 3, but the architect out of 14 units created 4 different total looks. And then as you change the materials or you change the colors of those, you will get different materials on each of these. and the houses are not right next to each other. The minimum is a 10-foot separation. Some of these are as much as 14, and they're angled a little differently as we go around the cul-de-sac. So we believe we've got a great product. We've got a small, beautiful neighborhood. We're trying to do up that entry feature along Beck Road, which is a big deal, as was mentioned. So we request your recommendation to go to the township board. We will have the rest of this done. I was supposed to get the master deed and the bylaws today from our attorney. I did not receive those, but the cluster housing agreement was sent to the township attorney. He made several revisions to it. We made the corrections to that, and it went back to him already. We're just waiting to hear.
So the entry feature will be constructed of similar material?
It'll be perhaps, yes, it'll be probably some brick and some stone. That's the way it's did.
It is one of the nicest entry features that I've seen in the township, and the fact that, you know, it's been recommended that we give you a waiver on the height because Beck is a busy road. I think that kind of helps buffer the sound, hopefully, for, you know, the residents on that. Was there, I was looking for it, maybe it was just staring me in the face. Do you have a rendering of what the mailboxes station is going to look like?
I did send a picture that I got from online of a decorative mailbox. It's a 16 unit, because we have 14, you can only buy a 16 unit with a decorative top on it. I did send a picture, I believe, at one point to the township. I do not have that with me.
What's it constructed of?
It's a metal box. It has to meet the U.S. Post Office.
Yeah, no, I know the box, but what supports the boxes? Is it a wooden frame?
No, it's a concrete pad, and it's a metal support.
Oh, I see. So it's sort of like the post office boxes with the, I've seen, similar to what's in Heather Hills, if you've
Probably
noticed.
very similar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
It all has to be approved by the post office.
okay.
You can't just put up
No,
something
but I've
other than
seen,
temporary.
yeah, I know that, but what I've seen in other developments, what they've done is they put the U.S. approved mailbox, but then they mount it inside of a wooden frame, and then, you know, 5 or 6 years later, it begins to rot away, and then the homeowners have to, you know, contribute to reconstruct the whole supporting mechanism for the mailboxes themselves.
We will be pouring a concrete slab, and then we will, the box is actually integral, the boxes, the gang of boxes is integral with the base. It's all metal.
And everything on the development will be irrigated?
Will be what?
Irrigated, they'll be sprinklered?
Yes, the entire frontage will have irrigation.
Okay, and what about the front
People
yard?
around all the homes will.
Well, will do that themselves, okay. And one question I always like to ask, and I should have asked it earlier on, so where is the snow going to be placed when they come in to plow?
Well, this winter I wouldn't have to worry so far.
No, but it's coming this weekend.
It'll be put perhaps along the entryway between the front and the first homes, and then in some of the open areas, and partially in the cul-de-sac, hydrants, not the cul-de-sac, and some of it will be placed in there.
Okay, so this is as long as it doesn't damage the vegetation that you'd be placing there, you know, any trees or bushes, that kind of thing.
Is the entry feature on both sides
Yes.
of the entrance?
Yeah, there's a bigger portion of the wall on one side and smaller on the other.
Other comments or concerns or questions? Let me just double check something here.
So, Laura, I do have one question. I'm a little confused about this berm on the north side.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that the berm would create uprooting some of the old trees that are there?
Creation of the berm because of the grading and the existing quality mature trees would require their removal.
So are we asking for any more trees along there then? I mean, there's not a lot of trees on the north side of this property.
The applicant's landscape plan has provided some additional evergreen fill in this
Okay.
area. If that doesn't appear acceptable,
No, that's what I'm saying. If we're not going to have the berm, then we've got to have more trees.
That is reflected on the current landscape plan. That was done on purpose.
Are most of your driveways, are they two-car driveways
Yes.
or four-car
Well,
driveways?
they're 2 cars wide. There'll be a typical width will be 16 feet going up to the garage.
So the depth, though, you could only fit one, or you could stack two?
You can put 2 side by side, and then there's
Two-
room for 2 cars in the garage.
Okay, so I'm just a little concerned with the parking. Yeah, so that's 5 off-site parking spots. I mean, if one person had a group over, you kind of screwed. I mean, there's no ancillary park. I mean, you got an entrance in, so you're not.
You're not suggesting they might park where it says no parking?
Possibly, yes. No, I'm not suggesting.
Or they could ask their neighbor.
They could also park at the end of their driveway, which would effectively block their driveway. Mhm.
But I don't disagree, it's tight. So what we need to do is make sure they sell only to hermits.
No, people that go away a lot.
People are Florida a lot.
Yeah,
They entertain in Florida, not in Plymouth.
yeah.
There you go.
Okay, any other concerns from the commission? Are we ready for a motion?
Yep.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval to the Board of Trustees on application 2296-0618 with the following conditions: that we not require the berm on the north side of the property, but ask for additional landscaping as suggested by the applicant, that we allow the entrance feature to be constructed as presented, that the guest parking is acceptable, and
The payment in lieu for the-
yeah, and the payment in lieu for the sidewalks, the internal sidewalks, to go to the township for the lack of internal sidewalks.
Is there support? Okay. Moved by Commissioner Pratt and supported by Commissioner Pastel, recommending approval of application 2296-0618 to the Board of Trustees. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations, good luck to you.
Thank you for your consideration.
Sure.
Dennis, did you get this? Did you get anything in your packet for that? Am I just missing it?
Yeah, yeah.
We're not going to talk about it today, she said.
Okay,
She told me something before the meeting.
Okay.
I don't think
all right.
we're not going to do anything with it. We'll sign.
How lucky. Are those?
Okay, we're moving on to application 2306-0918, the Hillside Residence.
Thank you, Chairman Sabelski.
Sure, thank you.
This application pertains to the proposed planned unit development, the PUD plan, for Hillside Residences on the former courthouse grill site. The applicant has requested final site development plan consideration, keeping in mind that this would be a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, should it please the Commission this evening, for final PUD approval with the PUD contract and associated exhibits to that contract. The PUD option was granted by the board earlier this summer, and in the fall, the applicant received tentative site plan approval. I'll briefly go through some of the outstanding items, some of which the applicant and I have discussed via email correspondence, and has stated they are willing and able to adjust the site plan to meet such standards. The first item is that the donation and transfer of the art from the courthouse grill would be secured with the township prior to the Board of Trustees consideration, and that the historical marker documentation would be filed with the township to confirm submittal that is to be erected on the site. The area for the historical marker is now shown at the the western portion of the site. In this corner area over here. I believe it was the intent that if people were walking towards downtown Plymouth, that there's this pathway that goes to one of the buildings here, that this might be a stop for some individuals. But the final location of the historical marker is still available for the township's consideration. I'd like to point out as well that there is an existing personal memorial located in this corner area of the site, and I provided that article via email. Just as kind of background, the development team is trying to be very respectful of that area and has requested permission if by the township to erect a small memorial or maybe some plantings or a bench, something depending on their conversations with the family if that was the end result, but asking for authorization to proceed with some type of contribution in this area to memorialize what happened in the future. So that was included on page 3 of your packet, and they have provided a landscape detail of that area. Final engineering approval, of course, is required. On page 4, we note that it's something that we haven't talked about during tentative site plan, but as this will be a site that we highly linked to downtown Plymouth and the amenities of Hines, having some bicycle parking would be a nice benefit to the site. Whether it's just a couple, maybe at each building, that would be appropriate. On page 5, we're noting that the applicant is requesting a waiver from the variety and plant material sizes requirements. They are proposing some deciduous shrubs that are 24 inches in height, 30 inches is required. I know that seems minor, but they would need a waiver from the commission to plant those 24 inches shrubs. They've stated the justification is that they're only available in that size to purchase. Additionally, the payment in lieu would need to be secured with the township prior to final consideration by the Board of Trustees. And Planning Commission consideration and determination regarding the facade materials would need to be approved as part of a motion this evening. Since the applicant appeared before the commission at their work session in late 2018, they have revised their elevations to include even more brick and are getting closer to that required 70%, but do fall still a bit short. They've also added architectural interest, especially on the north and south facade, so the kind of the two end caps for this building on the east side of the property, and then also along here, which I think is a improvement to the site. And looking at the facades that were included in your packet versus their first appearance, I think that they've made considerable efforts along the way to meet our ordinance, meet the intent of the ordinance, and to provide a quality product. So their waiver for the 70% facade masonry requirement, we do support, especially in light of the amount of building openings and transparency and balconies that they have provided on their elevations. We still need full details of the carports, and we are recommending some revisions to the monument signage that we previously communicated with the applicant about. In terms of making it more consistent with the overall feel of the site and the architecture of the building, and maybe the inclusion of Plymouth Community on the lower portion of the sign. Minor changes to the exterior lighting photometric plan, but they have made some changes, just a couple more outstanding items. And then the applicant is also working on the PUD contract that will need to be submitted for consideration by the Board of Trustees, and they are in the process of updating that so that they would be prepared to go before the board. So provided that the commission finds the facade modification acceptable and the landscaping modification acceptable for the deciduous shrubs, then we do recommend final consideration to the Board of Trustees for Hillside Residences.
How far short are they on the masonry? You said, we can grant them a waiver, but where are they? 60% or 68%?
They're both in the mid-60s, I believe, for both buildings. Maybe the applicant can clarify. 63 for one of the buildings.
Okay, fine, great. And Mr. Ridgman, your engineer report?
Thank you, Chairman. We have reviewed the final site plan dated September 2018 and received by our office on December 18th, 2018 for conformance with the engineering standards. Final engineering approval is a condition of final site plan approval, and due to the number and nature of comments, we do not recommend final engineering approval at this time. But we would not have any objections to the Planning Commission granting final site plan approval with the condition of receiving engineering approval and securing all necessary permits. I will say one of my main concerns had been addressed, and that was the flow and pressure of the water. They have done a flow test, and there is there's substantial flow and pressure. They will have to provide pumps to get it up to the top floors of their building, but there is enough flow and pressure in the system for that to work. They're still going to have to go through Wayne County, which is, they've got some feedback from Wayne County now. They're good with where the drive approach is, but they're still going to have to work through the stormwater issues with Wayne County. I've looked at what's there, and I believe everything can be addressed. It's going to be a challenge, but it can be, engineering comments can be addressed.
All right, thanks. And they've received a report from the fire department that have no objection. So want to come up and... I see you, those are the building materials that you've brought here?
Our rendering in your package, or you don't?
No, I don't have a digital copy of the latest one.
All right, I brought a flash drive if you could help me set it up with that.
This one you're looking for?
Yes. So this is obviously our 3D rendering. We've been in front of you a couple of times, and every time that we've come, we've tried to listen to what you had to say and express our feelings about the architecture and the Art Deco and trying to have a fresh, clean 21st century look and still keep that, but address as close as we can the percentages that the commission and the township is looking for. So we've basically kept what we were trying to do in terms of getting this real strong base color here, which is our darker brick color right here. And then we've graduated into slightly lighter as we've gone up. This white we've added as a fourth color in areas where we wanted to keep the white, but we wanted to get the masonry out. And what I want to do is go to our architectural plans because it shows up a little bit better. It'll take me a minute to get to them. But when you look at these plans, basically, and this is what we were talking about at the work session, we've got brick all the way up to the top belt, all the way across the building. You can see the different brick colors, the darker, and then the gradation all the way up to the lighter brick here. But you can see that brick line is basically going all the way up to that top band. And Alex talked about the importance of the Art Deco and keeping that top panel light. So we've kept that as the composite panel. And we went round and round trying to figure out how can we have the building with brick all the way up to the top band and not be at 75%. And we thought it might be fenestration, but as we ran through all the calculations and we just massed it out, the issue is where we have our balconies right here, we have a couple of things going on. We mentioned at the work session that from an industry standard, what you don't want to do is have masonry behind those balconies and penetrate with members through that and get water penetration into the units. We haven't done that for years. We stay away from that. The other thing is when you look at the verticality, we have strong horizontal lines with the balcony, but we have all of these elements that project up above and create a real nice rhythm of verticality as well as horizontal. So by trying to keep an industry standard and not penetrating that building, we've also brought the white siding down into this. So when you go back to the rendering, you can see that white showing up. As it comes down in between on those balcony lines. So it helps to create the verticality that's happening here and here. We've even created a reveal detail here to break up that end facade along with our solar panels. So we really think that we've done everything we can to try and meet the spirit and the intent of the ordinance, but also design a building that's sound from the standpoint of water penetration. And in that respect, that's really our hardship or why we're asking for that variance. As I mentioned, the siding, when you look at the siding percentages on the end, some of them are up at pushing 80%, but then on the other areas where we have that verticality on the balconies, that's what brings the percentage down. But I think when somebody looks at this building, they're going to say there's a lot of brick on it, and there is. And we've, as I said, varied
the different colors to try and have a lot of interest, and then added that white brick so that we could keep that white verticality to it.
Do you have anything else, or can we start asking questions?
You can start asking questions.
Okay, on the historical marker, what's the process in getting the text and what that's going to look like? Can you describe that a little bit?
We're going to tag team that. I'm going to let Laith come up and speak to that a little bit.
Good evening, Laith Jonah. In regards to the historical marker, apparently we got to submit an application to the municipality. We just gathered a bunch of information on the history of the building and all the different owners over the years and what it's gone down. So we're working on the application right now to get it submitted. As Laura said, we were hoping that we were going to get it down on the east end of the property, not quite to where that memorial is, but somewhat in that same area.
That's actually the west end.
West end?
West end, my fault. Yep, you're right. So it'd be going right down to the west end, basically in the corner section.
Yeah, I know the last time you were here, you had it at the other end, and I had a concern about it there, but I would, from my own personal perspective, I think somewhere near the entrance to the site, because if people were driving down the road and they wanted to read it, there's really no place to park there, where here they could at least pull in and take one of your parking spots temporarily while they get out of the car and read it, or just pull in and read it.
Depending on how big the sign actually needs to be, we might even be able to fit it in our monument sign.
That would be even
There's
better.
a section in the middle of
Yes.
the monument sign right now that's kind of planned.
Yeah.
Where we could just fit it right in there, if that's what.
So is the verbiage of the sign, will that be submitted to like the Board of Trustees or somewhere at the township to look at it before you send it off to the
We
state?
would send it over to planning. Laura would take a look at it, and we would work with administratively, apparently, at that point, or if the trustees would like to see it. Once it gets intact of exactly what it's going to be, I guess, at that point.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Is there some kind of like format that the municipality likes to follow, or?
I think it's
are
a
they all
state,
different,
it's
or
a
is
state,
it-
it's a state standard.
It's a state standard, it is, yeah.
But just, what are you going to say about the building? It's.
That's all being put together right now.
Right.
like
And
I
having it placed, as part of your monument sign or in that area, I think would really be an ideal situation.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And visitors to the site and people that live there, prospective residents, can appreciate a little bit better of what, where they're going to be living.
So I guess it'd be like right in this section right here, right underneath
Yeah.
the side residence.
I've seen different sizes of the signs. There's a smaller one and then there's a bigger one. So when you are looking at the application to the state,
What size it is,
Yeah.
and how it's going to be.
yeah.
I think that's also driven by how much information you're trying to put into it.
Well, in to put both the memorial, which I think is a very respectful thing for you to do, for the young men that passed, to have the historical marker at the same place doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Right. And while we're talking about the memorial, so you're still thinking about what this memorial, you're going to be talking to the family about it?
Yeah, we haven't made contact.
Okay.
We just got their information last week. And actually, that was my daughter that was trying to get a hold of them. And I can't say the conversation. I haven't talked to her about it.
Yeah,
yet. We will get a hold of them, and we'll definitely. We see how they respect it. I mean, they have Christmas trees.
I know, I've
decorations
seen
up
that.
there right now, so
Right.
it's not something we're going to go tear down by no means.
But while we're in that area, and I raised this issue up when you were here before, and I looked at the landscaping plan, and so I'm kind of directing this more to Laura. So in that corner where that, well, not right in that corner, but closer to that end of the site, but closer to as you're heading down into Hines Park. So I did a drive-by through there, and there are I see what they're going to do there, and there are box elder trees there, that some are going to be removed and some are going to stay. And there's also Tree of Heaven there. And, you know, in the ordinance, I looked it up, it seemed like I remember reading it. And the ordinance says that the following trees, because of various problems, are not considered to be desirable landscaping elements and therefore shall, in most cases, not be permitted. If it is demonstrated that such trees are associated with an appropriate wetland or other ecosystem to be preserved, or where removal of existing trees would result in a substantial loss of screening or buffering of adjacent lands, uses of public right-of-ways, the commission may permit their use. And box elder and Tree of Heaven are amongst that list. But when I drove over there and looked at it, there's a real drop-off there. You know, and I don't know, I mean, I'm going by the parking, you know, a lot that's there. So you're not going to, I mean, you're going to take that parking lot out, obviously. And I was trying to see where these trees are, and they're kind of going downhill toward the river. I can't, yeah, down, yeah, closer, yeah, that end, but down, right. Yeah, you're right. So I'm a little confused as how that landscaping is going to work down there. And they're planting some nice trees in there. But, you know, and I'd looked up about what's bad about box elder and Tree of Heaven, and they're very invasive. And box elders do have the notorious box elder bugs that like to go into buildings, you know, winter over. So I'm somewhat concerned about having those trees there.
Well, it's certainly permitted or stated in the ordinance to not allow for those types of species in new landscape plans. If the actual removal of existing trees beyond what they're proposing is something that the commission would like to consider, then that could be a discretionary requirement that you would apply.
Yeah, I still don't know how you're going to do that, because it's a real drop-off right there. I mean, it's straight down practically. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar, you know, if you looked at it that carefully.
I'm truly not.
Yeah, you need to kind of.
Excuse me, are you saying that you're concerned that we're planting trees down the slope?
No, I'm not concerned about that. Well, I would be if you were, because I'm not so sure how they're going to survive because of, you know, there's such a dramatic grade there. I'm assuming that the parking lot's going to be removed and you're going to be planting the trees, some of those trees where the parking lot is. But it says there's existing box elders and the Tree of Heaven. I can't tell what they are because, you know, the leaves are off the trees right now. But the vegetation that is there is pretty much all going downhill.
Unfortunately, our landscape architect is not here,
Yeah.
but as far as I know, he's had a lot of conversations with Laura. He's been to the site and looked at it. And what he's talking about is taking those trees where they are in that area and removing those and then putting new healthy species that will forest that area with a nice healthy environment. That's what the discussions I've had with him.
Well, I don't have
he's comfortable with where they're going and how they're being planted. That's all I can say at this point in time. And I think he's provided letters and email communications, and I thought we were in pretty good shape with that, Laura. Is that?
I believe so. There's a couple minor landscape things, but the landscape plans have come a long way from tentative site plan.
Yeah, maybe you need to, you know, talk to that landscape architect. I am concerned about those two the two types of invasive trees. Okay. And I'm just trying to, when I look at the plan and then go to the site, I just don't know how it's going to work, but you know, you two can figure that piece out. Anyone else have anything?
I have a question about your rooftop decks. Is there one on each building? What are the size? And what is the railing or containment feature to stop people from jumping over, going over, falling over?
So the rooftop deck that we have is basically,
The deck or the,
it's a terrace. That's
terrace.
Yes.
The
Well, I
roof.
think he's talking about the
We're
rooftop.
talking about the roof.
Rooftop terrace. Well, what we're referring to as the rooftop terrace is actually at the first living level. It's a roof that's above the parking deck. And that's on the back side of the, you can see it right here, on the back side of the 200 building. So basically, it would be in the, because that's the 200 building, it would be in the southeast corner of it. And it's overlooking the park, so it's a great location for it.
So it's not on the fourth level?
No. Rooftop, it's rooftop because it is rooftop of the parking deck, but we have no, we're not proposing anything up at the top, above the fourth living level. That is our rooftop deck. And the railing system that's on it is an open grid metal rail that's just like the railing system that's on all of our balconies.
So it's just kind of a common patio or common deck?
Correct, yes. And it's near our social rooms and all of our activities areas, so it's a perfect. Pardon me?
Both buildings?
No, just this one building. All of our social amenities and management and leasing are in the 200 building. And they're there because that's a great location for them, central, and then as I mentioned, that backs up to the park, so it's a great, when you're outdoors, you're overlooking the park and the trees.
Anyone else with questions, comments, concerns? How do we feel about the bike racks?
I like that
Everybody?
idea.
How do you feel about the bike rack?
I love bikes.
No, I think it's very logical. It's very logical.
Yeah,
We'll figure out a couple locations to get some bike racks in there for both buildings.
very appropriate, I think, for biking into downtown Plymouth or along Heinz Drive. You know, they close part of it off in the summer on Saturdays for biking. Oh, that hill is. All right, well,
Bobsled.
are we ready? Are we ready for a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval of 2306-0918, the Hillside Residences, to the Board of Trustees, subject to the size of the shrubs being allowed as proposed at 24 inches, and the approval of facade percentages given to us of 64 on the one building and 64.4 on the other building. What was it? 64 on the 100 and 64.4 on the 200, is that right?
I'll have to look at it.
It's 64 on the 200.
64 on the 200. Thank you. 64% approved on the 200 building and 64.4, I remember
Yep,
that number.
that's correct.
On the 100 building. Also, subject to final engineering approval and the engineer's report included in our packet.
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Pratt and supported by Commissioner Harb. Would you mind adding to your motion a review of the that landscape corner that I had referenced
No,
to
no
determine if the appropriateness of the two invasive species trees?
Sure. So also we would like to include that the area on that would be the southeast corner of the property.
Or no,
Southwest.
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 Yeah.
Southwest.
corner.
Southwest corner, no.
That'd be southeast. Southwest. Southwest.
It is southwest.
Southwest corner of the property, and I don't believe it, is with the invasive species of trees is properly handled and to the satisfaction of the township planner. And that bicycle racks be added to each, for each of the buildings' use.
Support.
Okay, great.
Do we need anything on the historical?
How about the historical marker?
How about the hysterical marker? That's right. And that the historical marker should be, no, I'm sorry, historical marker should be included in the entrance feature if at all possible.
Okay. Any further discussion? Additions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you. Good luck. Okay.
Whether do you want to
Laura, the text amendment to ordinance 99, Article 11.
We need to hold a public hearing in February for it.
Okay. So we're not doing anything with it tonight.
Yeah, just postpone, please.
Okay, is there a motion for, well, postpone until when, till the February meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Is there such a motion?
I move we postpone text amendment for the fence regulations to the February Planning Commission meeting.
support?
Moved by Commissioner Pratt and supported by Commissioner Barberina to postpone until February said application. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And we have the Planning and Zoning Monthly Report. Do you have anything to add? Anybody have questions?
If anyone has questions, I'm happy to
I
answer
did-
them.
What'd she say? Okay. So is there a motion to receive and file?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we receive and file the Planning and Zoning Monthly Report for December 2018.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Barberina, supported by Commissioner Pratt to receive and file our December monthly report. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And the Planning Commission Annual Report for 2018.
I have a question for Laura. What about the gate guidelines for properties that want to have gated communities?
As far as,
Of being a project that we look at or approve guidelines?
yeah, I'm happy to include that as something that we would consider in 2019. I recently, related to that, I had a discussion with the fire chief earlier this week regarding the proposed Regency at Ridge Meadows cluster development. And he wanted to note, even though he stated no deficiencies were found, that if it was to be a gated subdivision, that then the fire code would require, even if it was a gated boulevard, 2 non-emergency egress and ingress points for that site. Because he said that the gates can slow down the emergency responders as long as 3 minutes. Just even in terms of just cars stacking at that point. So I relayed that to the applicant, but they stated that their intent was not to have a gated subdivision at that location. But
Did they say they were thinking about gates?
No.
no, they said that it wasn't part of their initial consideration. But I think that's important to note, moving forward with developments. I believe if they're 30 lots or 30 units or greater, then 2 access points is required if they're gated.
But if they're ungated, there is no limit?
I think it's a higher limit. I'm not sure of the exact number.
But there is a limit.
There's a threshold, yeah. I'll note that to look into.
Any other comments on the annual report? So Laura, you're looking for recommend to forward it to the Board of Trustees, or what do you want us to do with this?
Well, so per the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act and the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, the Planning Commission is charged with putting together a report of the previous year activities, a collection of the meeting dates, etc. And we did that last year for the township, and then it's recommended to the Board of Trustees for their receive and file. And we'll be presenting that report in February's meeting. But in anticipation of that report, if there's anything that the Planning Commission wants to work on in this coming year or is of special interest, I know that we've previously talked about, for instance, maybe doing a group tour with the board and the ZBA or the DDA, or having a joint meeting, annual meeting together. Those are the types of things that then we would include to the Board of Trustees and really make it known that this is what we hope to accomplish this year.
Have you, I know we've talked about doing some revisions, to the ordinance, and we sort of been doing that, I feel like, piecemeal. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that in general, the ordinance, is well put together and serves the township well. I do think, we've taken a look at some of the fence provisions because that was a number of ZBA cases. The building department and Mark Lewis has shared with me some other repeat offenders in the ZBA, and that might be something to take a look at to try and update so that that reoccurrence doesn't happen as much. Or specific areas like subdivision gates.
So you don't see any glaring issues at the current moment that we need to address in the next year?
I think we successfully updated the PUD ordinance, which I think was a major improvement. And I think that has been a testament to how that was applied for hillside residences, of why that was needed and how that turned out to be successful. Because if the previous ordinance, PUD ordinance, had been applied for that, I don't think that we would have just reviewed the quality development that we saw this evening. So I'm quite pleased with that change. Perhaps maybe the parking standards could use some evaluation. A lot has changed, and the ITE standards, are quite different. Even thinking about shared parking, bicycle parking provisions. So that could be one area.
Laura, when you talk about when we do these cluster options and we take payment in lieu of amenities for future improvements in the township, who determines where that money goes and how it's spent? And I'm not familiar with that, so I'm trying to wrap my arms around that. So when we look at the township, we can't walk the township because there's not sidewalks throughout the township. I mean, there's gaps in many places. Could the funds go towards something like that, or sidewalk funds?
This year we're going to attempt to close some gaps. The challenge is that you have to get an easement from the property owner.
I understand.
And the property owner can say no.
Like on North Territorial.
Yeah, and there's nothing the township can do about it. You can't take the property. But where there are gaps that we are, because those dollars should theoretically go back into into that fund. That's how it should be managed. That's the point.
But that's a separate fund, isn't it? The sidewalk fund and now this amenities fund. So the sidewalk fund's just for sidewalks, and amenities are for improvements, let's say, to our parks?
Correct. And then there's a third account that was created this year for tree replacement.
Yeah.
And previously, when there was any sort of payment in lieu collected for sidewalks, which has always been a provision in the ordinance, I mean, at least for the last 20-some years.
It's been there for a long time.
It was just going to the general fund, and there was no record of where that money was being spent. So, you know, as part of our policy updates this past year, Cindy Kushner developed the 3 different accounts.
Yeah.
And they're going to be tracked where the different projects that those, the 3 accounts are going to receive funds from projects, and it'll be noted in a,
Yeah, they're notations. They're not separate funds, but they are notations within the,
correct, and they're all part of the BSNA system. So it's not just a slip of paper that could be, you know,
yeah, it's, yeah,
removed,
trackable.
or there's only certain people have access to BSNA to delete something. It's
Yeah.
very restricted. So it ensures accurate record keeping, and I believe it would be, you know, the ultimate decision of the Township Board of Trustees for how that money will be spent, but that would be discussed in public meetings, and then
Yeah, we just talked about it last night a little bit. So there'll be a sidewalk inspection program, and then we've been talking about it, trying to fill in some gaps, because sometimes some of the property owners, maybe, you know, you go back and ask again or something.
Or there's a new owner of the property.
Yeah, and I know somebody lives on Ann Arbor Trail who swears he was never asked. And there's no sidewalk in front of his house. Yeah, that one gap there.
Yeah.
That has a new property owner since there's a new owner of that property who would be. No, the previous owner said no, but the current owner has said he would allow it. That's a really good example there.
And that would be nice to know if you guys know of any areas like that where that may happen, especially, you know, Bob, we talked last night, if we can't get an easement across some of these areas we talked about, that may be something then we can look at trying to, an area to fill in.
Yeah, and, you know, I don't know if there's any records who was formally asked and denied, but again, the property could have changed hands since that time. Or the person got their position softened because everyone's riding their bikes and walking across it anyway. There's a big pathway.
Yeah, there is.
Wood chips. We can put wood chips.
Okay. Any other
Shove
comments?
wood chips on it.
So what kind of motion are you looking for from us then, again, to get back down to the housekeeping?
I guess just any recommendations, but a postponement until the February meeting, where the recommendation to the board would be made.
So a postponement till February? Okay. Is there such a motion?
I move we postpone till February, the planning commission and report recommendation of 2018.
Support.
Moved by Commissioner by Commissioner Pratt, supported by Commissioner Barberina to postpone said reports. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And now we have the election of officers. So we need a nomination for chair or nomination.
Nominate Dennis Sapolsky to continue as chair.
I second.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other I do accept. Any other nominations?
I nominate Kendra Barberina for secretary.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay. Kendra. Any other
I nominate
nominations?
Bill Pratt for vice chair.
Second.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, so we need to move on the motion for the election to the chair for Dennis Sapolsky. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? I abstain. And for vice chair, for Bill Pratt, is there a motion?
I move
We've already had the motion.
Oh, you already did the motion? Okay. Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, and secretary? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'll
Opposed?
abstain.
Okay, motion carries.
Oh, I abstain.
Okay. Got that all down there, Alice? Okay. Okay. And now,
Repeat from last year.
yeah.
Yeah.
Groundhog Day.
Copy and paste, Alice.
Any planning commission comments, questions? Okay, is there a motion for adjournment?
I move we adjourn.
Is there support?
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Pratt, and supported by Commissioner Barberina to adjourn the meeting at 10:55. All in favor signify by saying aye.